You may imagine yourself walking into a quiet twilight, where the hills of Ireland or the misted forests of Gaul are hushed beneath the falling light. Here the Celts once spoke of unseen realms, of spirits and ancestors, of a life beyond death that was not an end, but a gentle crossing. As you settle into this story, let your breath deepen and your mind soften. We will move slowly through ancient beliefs, as though through sacred groves where Druids once whispered, where rivers shimmered with mystery, and where eternity was not a distant thought, but a presence close at hand. Tonight, you are not simply listening. You are walking into memory, into myths woven of oak, water, and starlight. Rest now in the rhythm of these old voices. Chapter 1. The Celtic Soul and its Journey. The Celts, who once spread across much of Europe from Iberia to the British Isles, held views of life and death that were as fluid as the rivers winding through their lands. At the center of their understanding stood the soul, not as something fragile or temporary, but as something enduring. It was thought to move beyond the limits of a single body, passing through different forms, flowing like water across time. Death, in this vision, was never an ending. It was a transition, a moment of crossing into another season of being. The evidence we have comes not from the Celts themselves, for they left little writing, but from the observations of outsiders. Roman and Greek authors, encountering Celtic tribes in Gaul and Britain, were struck by the courage of their warriors. Julius Caesar, writing in his Commentari de Bello Gallico, described the Gauls as believing that souls do not perish, but after death pass from one to another. He noted that this belief encouraged bravery, removing fear of dying in battle, since death was seen as only another beginning. The philosopher Strabo, too, wrote of the Druids teaching immortality of the soul, and of the Pythagorean idea of transmigration finding a place among the Celts. What emerges from these accounts is not a precise doctrine, but a tone of certainty. The Celts did not treat death as a boundary to dread, but as a continuation. The cycle of nature, the falling of leaves, the return of spring, the ebb and flow of tides, mirrored their own vision of the soul. To live was to participate in a rhythm, not a straight line. Just as the sun sank and rose, so too did the spirit. The Druids, those learned figures who acted as priests, judges, and teachers, carried this philosophy deeper. Though their wisdom was preserved orally and never set down in writing, Roman sources suggest that they instructed their people in the reality of an afterlife. In Caesar's words, they believed the soul's endurance was a useful lesson, not only for courage but also for morality. A person who knew that their spirit would live again would act with different awareness, mindful that actions in this life could ripple into the next. This teaching may also have helped bind the warrior societies of the Celts. In a world of conflict, where tribes clashed with Romans, with neighboring peoples, and with each other, the promise of immortality gave warriors strength. To fall on the battlefield was not a loss, but a passage. Songs of victory and lament could blend, for both the fallen and the living were thought to share in the eternal cycle of rebirth. Yet, it would be too simple to think of this belief as uniform across all Celtic peoples. Archaeology and folklore suggest variety. In some places, burials were furnished with goods, weapons, ornaments, food, even chariots, tokens for the journey, signs that the dead would continue in some form of life where such things were still useful. In other places, cremation and the scattering of ashes spoke of a more symbolic release, the soul freed from the physical vessel. Each practice pointed toward the same underlying conviction, that the self endured, reshaped, but never erased. The seasonal festivals also reflected this sense of continuity. Samhain, the great turning of the Celtic year, marked not only the harvest and the coming of winter, but the closeness of the dead. It was believed that, at this liminal time, the souls of ancestors drew near, stepping lightly across the threshold between worlds. To honor them was to affirm that the living and the departed shared in one great cycle. The soul was not isolated, but woven into a larger fabric of kinship and time. One might pause here in the quiet of reflection and wonder, what does it mean to believe the soul cannot perish? For the Celts, it gave courage, it gave acceptance, it shaped how they built their tombs, raised their stones, and lit their fires. It shaped how they entered battle and how they sang their songs. In their worldview, death was no sharp ending, but a turning, like the winding of a wheel, like the slow return of spring after the frost. Modern scholars debate whether the Celts fully embraced reincarnation in the sense known to Indian traditions, or whether the Roman writers imposed familiar categories upon them. Pythagoras, centuries before, had taught that souls were reborn into new bodies, human or animal, as part of a cycle of purification. When Caesar described the Celts as sharing this view, was he hearing echoes of something familiar, or was he witnessing a uniquely Celtic vision expressed in terms he could understand? The truth is elusive, hidden in oral teachings that were never written down, and yet, the persistence of the theme in so many accounts suggests a core reality. The Celts saw the soul as indestructible, as endlessly enduring. Archaeology supports this impression in subtle ways. In rich burials across Gaul and Ireland, goods were placed as though for continued use. Swords laid beside warriors, ornaments beside noblewomen, food vessels set carefully in tombs. To give such offerings would make little sense if death were an end. Instead, they speak of provision for a journey or for another phase of life. The soul was expected to travel, to need, to partake again. Even myths that have reached us from medieval manuscripts echo the same motif. In Irish tales, heroes and lovers often journey to otherworld realms, lands where time flows differently, where youth is eternal, where the cycle of death seems softened or transcended. These stories, though recorded later under Christian influence, may preserve traces of older ideas, that the soul was destined for journeys beyond, where continuity was assured. For the Celts then, life and death were not opposed, they were intertwined. To live was to move toward death, and to die was to move toward another life. Courage in battle, reverence at festivals, offerings at tombs, all were threads in this tapestry. Imagine for a moment the calm that such a belief could bring. To see death not as a loss but as a passage. To know that one's essence would not dissolve, but would rise again, perhaps in another body, another time, another place. Such a view removes the sharp edge of fear. It casts existence in broader terms, a rhythm of many chapters, each life one part of a greater whole. And perhaps this is why Roman authors emphasized it so strongly. To them, the Celts were both fierce and strangely fearless. They could charge into battle with little regard for survival, for they believed survival was not bound to the body. The Romans may have found this unnerving, even admirable, and they preserved it as one of the most striking features of Celtic culture. Still, as we reflect now, centuries later, it is important to see this belief not only in terms of war, it was also about kinship, memory, and reverence. It meant that ancestors were not gone, but present. It meant that the natural cycles of the world were not mere background, but mirrors of human destiny. It meant that time was not a line to be broken, but a circle to be walked again and again. So the Celtic soul was imagined as something that endured, a traveler, a participant in the eternal rhythm of life and death. Never fixed, always moving, like water, like wind, like the sun itself. And in this way, life itself could be seen as a season. Spring brought birth, summer brought vigor, autumn brought harvest, and winter brought rest. But after winter, spring would return. So too the soul, cycling, renewing, never extinguished. This vision carried both courage and comfort. It carried the promise that nothing essential was ever lost. Tonight, as you listen and let these ancient voices settle around you, you may hold that thought gently, that your own life, like theirs, may be one season of many, that endings are never final, that the journey of the soul is a river without end. Chapter 2. The Druidic Teachers of Eternity. The ancient world was filled with voices that carried wisdom, but among the Celts, the most revered of these were the Druids. They were not kings, though they held sway over kings. They were not warriors, though warriors listened to their counsel. They were teachers, keepers of sacred knowledge, and guardians of truths that reached beyond the bounds of a single lifetime. In the shadow of oak trees and beside quiet rivers, they wove their understanding of eternity into the minds of their people. The Druids left no written record of their own. Their teachings were oral, passed down through memory, ritual, and the slow rhythm of recitation. To them, wisdom was alive, and to write it down would be to fix it in place, stripping it of its spirit. Knowledge had to breathe, to move from one voice to another, so that it remained a living thing. This is why so much of what is known of them today comes not from their own words, but from the pens of outsiders Roman generals, historians, and philosophers who looked upon them with a mixture of admiration and suspicion. Julius Caesar, in his accounts of the Gallic Wars, gave one of the most detailed descriptions of the Druids. He claimed that they taught the doctrine of the soul's immortality, instilling in their people a remarkable fearlessness in the face of death. According to Caesar, the Druids believed that after death, the soul did not perish but passed on into another body, beginning again, renewed in form though not in essence. To the Roman mind, this was a philosophy not unlike that of Pythagoras, the Greek thinker who spoke of metempsychosis, the migration of souls. Caesar drew this comparison, perhaps to make sense of a people whose rituals and convictions seemed otherwise strange to him. Yet while Roman writers often sought to rationalize the Druids through their own frameworks, the Celtic world carried these ideas with its own distinctive spirit. For the Celts, the teaching of immortality was not an abstract philosophy. It was a lived truth, woven into the courage of warriors, the patience of farmers, and the rituals of the community. To believe that death was not an end, but a passage was to see life itself as part of a much greater cycle, like the turning of the seasons or the flowing of a river into the sea. The Druids spoke of these mysteries in places set apart from ordinary life. Sacred groves, clusters of ancient oak, yew, or mistletoe-covered trees became their sanctuaries. In these quiet spaces, surrounded by the oldest living beings of their landscape, they shared teachings that were never meant for the open marketplace. To step into such a grove was to enter a boundary between the visible and the invisible, a threshold where the eternal seemed close at hand. The rustle of leaves became more than mere wind. It was a whisper of timeless truth. Roman accounts often describe these groves with unease. To outsiders, they were places of dark superstition, places where sacrifices might be offered and where unseen forces lingered. But to the Celtic people, these groves were not sinister. They were sanctuaries where the veil of the ordinary world grew thin. Just as a temple of stone could lift the heart toward heaven, the grove of oak lifted the mind toward eternity. The Druids themselves seemed to embody this mystery, men and women who stood at the threshold between worlds, mediators of law, memory, and fate. Because their knowledge was hidden from writing, much of what they taught remains a mystery today, and perhaps this was their intent. The Druids were said to study for 20 years before being recognized as masters, memorizing vast cycles of law, and poetry. To carry such knowledge was to live within it, to be shaped by it, and to become a vessel through which eternity could be spoken. Theirs was not a wisdom easily shared in simple words, but one that demanded patience, discipline, and silence. Reflecting on their role, one might ask, why were they so devoted to the teaching of immortality? Perhaps it was because courage was needed in every corner of Celtic life. The tribes faced war, loss, and the constant shifting of power under the shadow of Rome. To believe in the endurance of the soul was to steady the heart, to face suffering with strength. The idea that the soul would return again, renewed, meant that no battle, no loss, and no ending was final. Life itself was but a chapter in a longer story. And yet, in the stillness of their groves, one imagines the Druids also teaching that immortality was not merely about bravery in battle. It was also about the enduring link between all things, between ancestors and descendants, between the living and the dead, between the visible world and the unseen. The oak tree lives for centuries, standing tall while generations come and go. In its presence, the Druids could point to eternity not as a distant abstraction, but as a living witness rooted in the earth. Roman writers, however, did not always capture this depth. To them, the Druids were obstacles to conquest, wielding influence that could rally tribes against Roman rule. Their accounts are colored by politics as much as by curiosity. Yet even through these distortions, a truth shines through, that the Druids were not simply priests or philosophers, but teachers of eternity, guiding their people to see beyond the fleeting span of a single life. Imagine standing in one of those sacred groves. The air is still. The sound of leaves rises and falls like a distant tide. The Druids speak softly, not of conquest or of wealth, but of the soul's journey beyond death. In that moment, time itself seems to widen, and what felt final begins to feel like a passage. The silence of the grove lingers in the imagination even now. The Druids may be gone, their voices silenced by centuries, but the oaks remain, and in their shade, one may still sense the quiet teaching that life is not a closed circle, but a flowing river, always moving, always returning. In the end, the Druids fade into silence, the silence of oak roots stretching deep, the silence of wisdom carried only in memory. Yet within that silence lies a question that has never been fully answered. When the soul steps beyond this life, where does it wander next? Chapter 3, The Otherworld, a land beyond veils. In the Celtic imagination, death was not an end. It was a passage into another realm, a place both wondrous and near, yet hidden from ordinary sight. This realm was known by many names. In Ireland, it was Tir na Nog, the land of youth. In Wales, it was Annwn, the deep otherworld. In later traditions, it was Mag Mell, the plain of delight. Though the names differed, the essence remained the same, a place beyond veils, where abundance never faded, beauty never withered, and life continued in forms more radiant than those of the earthly world. The idea of the otherworld was not a single, fixed doctrine. It was fluid, shifting across tribes, regions, and centuries. What united these visions was the conviction that another life existed beyond the fragile borders of this one. Unlike the stark underworlds of some ancient religions, the Celtic otherworld was not primarily a place of shadow or punishment. Instead, it was a realm of perfection and plenty, a mirror of life, but untouched by decay. In Irish tales, Tir na Nog was described as a land where no one grew old, where music never ceased, and where the soil bore endless fruit. It was a country of youth, beauty, and love, where time flowed differently, if it flowed at all. Heroes who journeyed there might spend what felt like a few days, only to return and find that centuries had passed. The land itself seemed to exist just beyond the edge of the horizon, across the sea, or hidden within a green hill. It was close enough to touch, yet always beyond reach. The Welsh spoke of Annwn, a realm both alluring and mysterious. In early poems like those of Taliesin, Annwn was not only a place of plenty, but also of challenge and transformation. The cauldron of Annwn, for example, was said to bestow wisdom and inspiration upon those deemed worthy. It was guarded fiercely, suggesting that entry into the otherworld was not given freely, but had to be earned through courage, insight, or divine favor. Unlike the eternal ease of Tir na Nog, Annwn sometimes carried the sense of a testing ground, a place where the soul encountered truths deeper than those of the mortal world. Mag Mell, the plain of delight, offered yet another image. It was a realm of eternal pleasure, peace, and harmony, often reached by a chosen few. Poets described it as a luminous meadow where joy was unending, where no sorrow intruded. This vision may have developed later, influenced by both native traditions and contact with Mediterranean ideas of paradise. Yet it retained the Celtic sensibility, a paradise not in the sky, but woven into the very fabric of the world, just hidden from human eyes. Across these traditions, one theme stands out: the otherworld was never far away. It was not distant, unreachable, or placed in some abstract heaven. It was near. It could be glimpsed in the still surface of a lake, felt at the crest of a hill, or entered through a cave, a mist, or even a dream. For the Celts, the world was layered, and the boundary between the visible and the invisible was thin. The otherworld pressed close, like breath on the skin, waiting for the right moment, the right ritual, or the right fate to reveal itself. Scholars have often pointed out how this nearness of the otherworld reflected the Celtic landscape itself. Ireland, Wales, and Scotland are lands filled with mist, green hills, islands, and sudden changes of light. In such places, it was easy to believe that another world lay just beyond sight, that a shimmer on the water or a door in the hill might lead into eternity. The natural world was not merely background, it was the veil itself, the boundary that concealed and revealed the eternal realm. This vision of the afterlife shaped not only myths, but daily life. To believe in Tir na Nog was to believe that youth and joy could never truly be lost. To honor Annwn was to accept that wisdom and courage carried value beyond death. To imagine Mag Mell was to dream of a peace that surpassed the struggles of the earthly world. Such beliefs gave shape to rituals of burial, to songs sung for the departed, and to the courage carried into battle. Unlike traditions where the afterlife was sharply divided between reward and punishment, the Celtic otherworld was less about judgment and more about continuation. It reflected a worldview that saw life, death, and rebirth as part of one flowing cycle. The soul did not vanish into silence. It stepped into a realm where the beauty of the world was preserved and intensified. The joys of life, music, feasting, love, bravery, were not lost at death, but transfigured in eternity. And yet, there is a subtle tension in these stories. The other world is abundant, yet often elusive. Heroes who visit may long to remain, yet are called back to the mortal world. Those who return find that time has shifted, that what was once familiar has passed away. It is as though the other world is too close to resist, yet too vast to fully possess. It invites, but it also reminds the living that their place is not yet there. In the quiet of reflection, one wonders, what did the Celts see in these visions? Perhaps they were not only describing a place beyond death, but also giving voice to a sense of the sacred within life itself. The other world may have been a symbol of the perfection glimpsed in moments of beauty, courage, or love. A reminder that even in this life, the eternal brushes against the ordinary, like the touch of mist that clings to the skin before vanishing. The land beyond veils was not a distant heaven. It was near as breath, as close as the silence that settles between heartbeats. It was a place where youth never faded, where beauty endured, where wisdom deepened. A place that continues to haunt the imagination even now. And so the chapter closes, not with certainty, but with the lingering question, if the other world is so close, how many times have we passed by its hidden doors without knowing? Chapter 4, Gates of Passage, Water, Mist, and Hollow Hills. For the ancient Celts, the boundary between this world and the next was not an abstract line. It was tangible, felt in the landscape itself. The earth and sky were alive with thresholds, places where the living might brush against the other world, or where the departed might drift across unseen. These were not invented doorways, but natural ones. The surface of lakes, the mouths of caves, the flow of rivers, the quiet folds of mist, and the green slopes of hollow hills. Each became, in story and belief, a gate of passage. Lakes and still waters held particular power. To look into their surfaces was to see both reflection and depth. In Celtic lore, water often concealed another realm beneath its sheen. Archaeology has shown that lakes and rivers were sites of offerings. Swords bent before being cast into the water, cauldrons lowered into depths, jewelry and coins deliberately surrendered. Such gifts were not discarded, but entrusted, given to the unseen powers who dwelled beneath. For the Celts, water was not merely a resource, but a living veil, one that concealed the radiant halls of gods and spirits. To enter such waters, in story or in death, was to step across into eternity. Caves, too, carried a sense of threshold. The darkness within was a stark contrast to the light of the world above. To descend into a cavern was to leave the ordinary world behind and to enter a womb-like space that suggested both ending and beginning. In Irish tradition, certain caves were spoken of as entrances to the seed, the abodes of the fairy kind, or the hidden halls of the other world. In Welsh sources, caves and hollows could conceal pathways to Annwn, the realm below. These were not places of dread in the same sense as the Greek Hades. Instead, they were liminal zones, passages where one world brushed against the next. Rivers, forever flowing, symbolized transition. They were lines of movement in the land, constantly shifting, never still. To cross a river in story was often to cross into another state of being. Folklore carried memories of rivers that were more than physical streams. They were spiritual boundaries. Some tales describe warriors who crossed a river only to find themselves transported into another time, another realm. Others tell of rivers that divided the living from the dead, much like the more familiar Styx of Greek imagination. Yet within the Celtic vision, these rivers were not places of despair, but of passage, carrying the soul gently onward. Mist was perhaps the most delicate of thresholds. It appears suddenly, concealing the familiar and making the known seem strange. In Celtic tales, mist often marked the moment of crossing. A hero might walk through a fog on the moor and emerge in the other world, greeted by music, feasting, or strange silence. Mist blurred the edges of reality, turning fields into dreamscapes and hills into hidden sanctuaries. For people who lived in lands where mists rolled across valleys with regular grace, it was natural to imagine that such veils were more than weather. They were the breath of another realm, drifting close to the world of mortals. Among the most enduring images are the hollow hills. the green mounds, barrows, and rises scattered across the Celtic landscape. These cedar, as the Irish called them, were not simply hills but doorways. Within them dwelled the Tuatha de Danann, the divine or semi-divine beings who, after retreating from the world of men, were said to have gone beneath the earth. The hills concealed their radiant halls, lit by an eternal glow, filled with music and abundance. At certain times, on Samhain for example, when the year turned and the veil thinned, the doors of the hollow hills might open, allowing the living to glimpse or enter the other world. Such places were not imagined lightly. Across Ireland, Britain, and Gaul, ancient burial mounds still rose from the land. To those who built them, these were places of the dead, carefully shaped to hold the remains of ancestors. To later generations, they became imbued with mystery, as if the mounds themselves continued to pulse with presence. To pass by a hollow hill was to feel the weight of memory and the breath of eternity. They were landscapes of transition, where the earth seemed to curve inward, sheltering secrets of both life and death. Archaeological evidence and folklore meet here. In many sites, burial chambers within mounds align with the rising or setting sun at solstices, suggesting a careful link between the cycles of time and the promise of renewal. The alignment of stone and earth echoed the belief that death was not an end, but part of a greater rhythm. The Celts inherited and reimagined these landscapes, layering myth upon stone and turning them into gates of passage. To walk among such places was to sense that life itself was porous. The world of the Celts was not divided neatly into seen and unseen, but layered, interwoven. Water shimmered with depth, mist curled with mystery. Hills held their secrets beneath their green cloaks. Every threshold reminded them that the soul's journey was not bounded by mortal sight. And yet, reflection lingers. If the gates of passage were so near, in every river, in every drifting fog, in every hollow hill, then perhaps the other world was not a distant kingdom, but a hidden companion. Perhaps the Celts were not only speaking of the journey after death, but also of the nearness of eternity within life itself. The chapter settles here, among veils and thresholds in the hush of landscapes that both conceal and reveal. Gates stand everywhere, silent and waiting, and one is left to wonder, how thin is the veil, and how often might we already have brushed against it without knowing? Chapter 5. The Eternal Feast of the Blessed. Feasting was more than nourishment to the Celts. It was an expression of life itself, a ritual of community, status, and joy. Around the fire or in the hall, food and drink bound people together, marking victories, treaties, and rites of passage. To share a meal was to affirm belonging. To deny it was to wound honor. It is little wonder, then, that when imagining the afterlife, the Celts envisioned it not as silence or isolation, but as a great banquet, eternal, abundant, and filled with music. In the myths of Ireland and Wales, the other world is often described as a place where feasting never ends. Heroes who cross its threshold are greeted not by hunger or shadow, but by long tables set with delicacies. There is roasted meat, steaming bread, goblets of sweet drink, and music that carries through the air as naturally as breath. To the Celtic mind, joy after death would not be abstract bliss. It would be the perfected version of what gave life meaning, gathering, eating, singing, and celebrating in harmony. The contrast to mortal life made this vision even more powerful. In the harsh realities of early Europe, food was not guaranteed. Winters could bring hunger, harvests could fail, and war could leave the land barren. Feasting in the mortal world was always temporary, fragile, and tied to fortune. Yet in the afterlife, the feast was eternal. No guest went hungry. No fire went out. Abundance flowed without fear of loss. To imagine this was to dream of a release not only from death, but from the constant anxiety of want. Ancient texts suggest how central this image was. In Irish sagas, the halls of the gods, or the sidhe, are filled with inexhaustible cauldrons and magical animals that replenish themselves when eaten. The Dagda, one of the great deities, possessed a cauldron that could never be emptied, a vessel of endless giving. To sit at such a table was to know that hunger itself had been defeated, replaced by perpetual satisfaction. In Welsh tradition, Annwn too was marked by feasting. Poems speak of cauldrons whose contents restored life or granted poetic vision, linking the act of eating not only to survival, but to wisdom and inspiration. Music was never far from these banquets. In Celtic culture, the feast was inseparable from song. Bards and harpers gave voice to the deeds of ancestors, filling the hall with memory and rhythm. In the other world, this music became eternal, blending with laughter and conversation into a harmony that never faltered. Food and song together embodied the idea of fullness. The body fed, the spirit lifted, the soul at rest. The imagery of feasting was also social. It reflected the deep Celtic value placed on hospitality. To offer food and drink to a guest was sacred duty. To withhold it was shame. Thus, the afterlife banquet symbolized not only abundance but perfect welcome. All souls were guests, honored and embraced at the divine table. This vision eased the fear of death by transforming it into reunion, a place where no one was excluded, where every seat was filled, and where generosity flowed without end. It is striking how this vision differed from traditions of judgment or punishment. For the Celts, the afterlife was not defined by division into reward and suffering. Instead, it was a continuation of the good things of life, freed from the limits of time and scarcity. The eternal feast was not a prize for the righteous alone, but a natural extension of existence itself. Death did not sever one from joy. It led into a deeper, fuller communion. Archaeological finds echo this belief. In many Celtic burials, vessels, cauldrons, and drinking horns have been discovered, placed beside the dead. These were not random goods, but symbols of the feast awaiting them. To bury a chieftain with his drinking horn was to prepare him for the eternal banquet. To place food or drink in the grave was to send the soul onward with provision. The grave became the threshold, and the objects within it whispered of the eternal feast beyond. And so, across myth and ritual, the Celts spoke of an afterlife not barren but brimming, not silent but alive with song. The banquet hall of eternity shimmered in their stories as a place where the struggles of hunger and the burdens of want dissolved. It was a vision of rest, but not in emptiness. Rest was found in fullness, in the satisfaction of both body and spirit, in endless nourishment and endless joy. One can pause here in reflection. To imagine death as a feast is to shift fear into comfort. It is to see eternity not as a void, but as a long table where warmth never fades, where friends never part, and where the music of life plays on without end. The chapter closes with this image: a hall lit softly by firelight, tables spread with abundance, voices mingling in harmony, and within it, the soul at rest, full, welcomed, and at peace. Chapter 6: The Cauldron of Renewal. In Celtic tradition, few symbols carry such weight as the cauldron. At once ordinary and extraordinary, it was the vessel in which food was cooked, drink was shared, and rituals were performed. Yet in myth, the cauldron became more than a household object. It was transformed into a sacred container, holding within it the mysteries of life, death, and rebirth. To understand Celtic afterlife beliefs, one must pass through the rim of the cauldron, for in its depths lay the promise of renewal. Among the most famous of these vessels was the Dagda's cauldron. The Dagda, a figure of immense power and authority within Irish mythology, was often described as a fatherly god, both fierce in battle and generous in spirit. His cauldron was said to be inexhaustible. It never ran empty, no matter how many it served. It granted abundance to all who approached it, and none left unsatisfied. In a world where hunger haunted daily life, this image was not only comforting, but profoundly spiritual. The cauldron was a promise that fullness, both of body and soul, was possible, and that generosity itself was divine. Yet the cauldron was more than a symbol of plenty. In other traditions, it became an object of resurrection. Some myths describe warriors slain in battle being cast into magical cauldrons, only to rise again, restored to life and ready to fight once more. These were not simple stories of enchantment. They reflected a deeper truth, that death was not seen as final. The cauldron embodied the idea that life could be renewed, that existence was cyclical, and that even destruction could be followed by restoration. The Welsh tales of the Mabinogion preserve this theme. In the second branch, the cauldron of rebirth plays a central role. Warriors placed within it would live again, though mute and without speech. The detail of silence is telling. These reborn figures had presence but lacked voice. They could fight, but they could not sing, speak, or share. Perhaps this was a quiet reminder that life restored was not the same as life untouched. Resurrection came at a cost. Renewal, though wondrous, carried its own mystery and incompleteness. The cauldron also held a strong connection to wisdom. In Irish lore, vessels of inspiration were said to bestow knowledge upon poets and seers. The act of drinking from or gazing into a cauldron could open the mind to visions. In this sense, the cauldron was not only about physical renewal, but about the awakening of the spirit. To enter its depths was to encounter knowledge hidden from ordinary sight, to emerge not only alive, but enlightened. These myths reflected the broader Celtic worldview. Life was not linear, but cyclical, bound to rhythms of nature, the turning of seasons, the death and return of the sun, the harvest that withered only to grow again. The cauldron mirrored these patterns. It was the earth's womb, the wellspring of regeneration, the vessel of transformation. Just as seeds buried in soil rise again, so too could a soul pass through darkness and return renewed. Archaeological finds strengthen this picture. One of the most striking examples is the Gundestrup cauldron, discovered in Denmark, though tied to Celtic art and ritual. Its intricate designs depict gods, animals, and mythic scenes. Among its panels is an image of a figure lowering a man into a vessel, while armed warriors march away. Scholars see in this the theme of rebirth, a human consigned to the cauldron, then restored to join the ranks of the living. The vessel itself was immense, large enough to immerse a body, making it a powerful ritual object as well as a symbol. To the Celts, then, the cauldron was not a static image, but a living metaphor. It encompassed nourishment, renewal, inspiration, and resurrection. It was a reminder that death was not the end, that cycles turned endlessly, and that life poured forth again from hidden depths. One might pause and consider why the image of a cauldron carried such weight. Perhaps it was because the cauldron was so close to daily life. Every household used one. Every feast depended on it. To imagine it as divine was to lift the ordinary into the sacred. To see in the most familiar vessel the ultimate mystery of existence. It was the place where raw ingredients were transformed into nourishment, a small echo of how the soul itself might be transformed by death into something renewed. And there is a gentle, dreamlike quality in this vision. To picture warriors rising once more, drawn from the darkness of the cauldron into the light, is to glimpse eternity as process rather than finality. Renewal is never still. It unfolds again and again, like breath, like tides, like seasons. The cauldron reminds us that the end may be a return, that loss may contain a hidden seed of restoration. As the myths close, the image remains steady, a vast vessel steaming with mystery, standing at the center of the other world. Around it, souls gather. Some are nourished, some are reborn, some find vision that stretches beyond time. It is a reminder that the human spirit, like the cauldron itself, contains more than emptiness. It holds the possibility of endless renewal. And so the chapter rests with this quiet reflection. If life itself is a vessel, what hidden depths lie within it, waiting to be stirred into new form? Chapter 7, Reincarnation and the Wheel of Lives. In the weaving of Celtic belief, death was never the end. Instead, it was a passage, a folding of one life into another. Among the Celts, there existed the profound conviction that the soul could not be destroyed. It passed from body to body, from moment to moment, like a flame transferred from one torch to the next. This belief, known as transmigration or metempsychosis, was recorded not only in their own oral traditions, but also by outside observers who found the idea both striking and unusual. Julius Caesar, in his writings on the Gauls, noted that the Druids taught of the soul's immortality and its journey beyond death. According to him, they believed that the soul did not perish but moved on, inhabiting another form. He remarked that this conviction had a practical effect. It lessened the fear of death and fostered courage in battle. If death was not a final erasure, but merely a passage into another existence, then bravery could flourish. To fall in war was not to vanish, but to begin again. Other Roman and Greek writers echoed this portrayal. Diodorus Siculus, writing in the 1st century BCE, described the Druids' teaching in much the same way. Strabo too mentioned their doctrine of immortality. Their consistent testimony suggests that the Celts truly held a deep-rooted belief in cycles of life and death. While some scholars caution that these accounts may reflect outside interpretation, they nonetheless align with the broader Celtic imagination, an imagination that saw the world itself as cyclical, bound to rhythms of renewal. The influence of Greek philosophy may also have played a role. The doctrine of transmigration was central to Pythagorean thought. Pythagoras taught that the soul was eternal and that it moved from one life to another, carrying with it lessons and burdens. Later philosophers, such as Plato, developed these themes further. In his dialogue, the Phaedo, Plato described the soul's immortality and its rebirth in new bodies. Given the interactions between Celtic and Greek cultures, especially through trade and migration, it is plausible that such ideas were exchanged and interwoven. Yet the Celtic view was not simply borrowed, it fit naturally within their own cosmology. For a people who honored the turning of the seasons, who watched the sun sink only to rise again, and who lived close to cycles of growth and decay, the thought that the soul itself followed such rhythms was both intuitive and affirming. Life was not linear but circular. Birth, death, and rebirth were not isolated events, but linked stages of a greater journey. Archaeological finds add subtle hints to this belief. Celtic burial practices often included grave goods, tools, weapons, and ornaments. These may have been seen as provisions for a journey beyond, but they also suggest a belief that the soul's story was not concluded with the body's stillness. The presence of such items echoes a confidence in continuity, that the deceased would need these things again, somewhere, somehow. The wheel of lives is a phrase that captures this vision. Just as the wheel turns, so too did existence. One spoke leads into another, one rotation into the next. To be cast down into death was to return again upon the circle. This image is not unique to the Celts. Across cultures, the wheel became a metaphor for time and existence. In India, the wheel of samsara turned endlessly, binding souls to cycles of birth and death. In Greece too, philosophers spoke of cycles and returns. But for the Celts, the wheel was rooted in their land and their rituals, a rhythm felt in the pulse of their seasons and in the tides of their myths. To believe in reincarnation was to believe in reshaping. Life was not erased. It was molded anew. A soul might take up another form, live in another body, learn another set of joys and sorrows. The lessons of one life might echo in the next, shaping character and destiny, though the details of these beliefs remain veiled, for the Druids left no written records of their doctrine. The fragments preserved by outsiders suggest a conviction that no life was wasted. Every ending was an opening. Every loss was also a beginning. There is something gentle in this thought. The grief of death is softened by the hope of return. The fear of annihilation is eased by the promise of continuity. To imagine that those who depart may walk again in another guise is to hold death as change, not destruction. It is to trust in the resilience of the soul, like a river that disappears underground only to rise again, flowing onward in another place. One may pause to wonder if lives are indeed reshaped and repeated. What of memory? Do the echoes of one life cling faintly to the next? Are there traces of former selves, carried as whispers within us? The Celts, like the Pythagoreans, seem to suggest that the soul bore the weight of its past, learning, growing, and evolving across lifetimes. Yet they also left the mystery intact. Some questions were not answered, but preserved as sacred silence. In the hush of reflection, one can sense the comfort such a vision offered. To the warrior who fell in battle, to the mother who mourned, to the elder who neared death, the thought that existence continues brought strength. It was not a denial of loss, but a reshaping of its meaning. The wheel of lives continues to turn in imagination. It suggests that our own lives too may not be the final verse of our story, that perhaps every breath is a continuation of one taken long ago, that perhaps even death is not an ending, but a curve in the circle. And so this chapter rests in the quiet reminder: life is not lost, only transformed. Like the seasons, like the turning wheel, it returns, reshaped yet unbroken. Chapter 8, Annwn, the Welsh realm of mystery. Among the many visions of the Celtic otherworld, none is as enigmatic as Annwn, the realm of the Welsh imagination. Its name itself speaks of mystery. Some translate it simply as the deep place or the underworld, yet its meaning was never fixed. Annwn was not hellish in the Christian sense, nor was it a place of torment. Instead, it was a realm both alluring and distant, a land that existed beyond the known world, woven into the fabric of myth and poetry. Our main glimpse of Annwn comes through the Mabinogion, the great collection of medieval Welsh tales, and through scattered poems attributed to the bard Taliesin. These works, though written down in the Christian Middle Ages, preserve echoes of older oral traditions. Within them, Annwn is not described with fear, but with a sense of wonder. It is a place of feasting, music, and abundance. It is mysterious, yes, but not cruel. In the tale of Pwyll, Prince of Dyfed, the doors of Annwn open briefly. Pwyll encounters Annwn, the ruler of that hidden realm. Their meeting begins not with hostility, but with a strange bargain. Annwn proposes that they exchange places for a year and a day. Pwyll, disguised as Annwn, will rule over Annwn and confront Annwn's rival. In return, their alliance will bring peace between them. This tale reveals much about Annwn. It was a kingdom with its own ruler, its own disputes, and its own order. It was not simply a vague afterlife, but a structured realm, alive with presence and purpose. Annwn himself is a figure of majesty and mystery. He is not portrayed as a tyrant or a demon, but as a king whose honor and dignity rival those of mortal lords. His world is filled with the strange and the spectral. Among its most famous images are his hounds, white as snow with ears the color of fresh blood. These spectral dogs, known in later folklore as the Caen Annwn, were said to lead ghostly hunts across the skies. Their cries were both beautiful and unsettling, a sound that lingered between worlds. Yet Annwn, for all its associations with death and the beyond, was not a place of dread. It was not a pit of punishment or a realm of endless shadow. Instead, it was seen as a place of beauty and abundance, an inverted mirror of the human world. Its feasts overflowed with food and drink. Its halls resounded with music. Its treasures were beyond measure. In many stories, mortals who ventured there were dazzled by its richness, tempted to stay forever. This is where the uniqueness of Annwn lies. It was not dark, but it was hidden. It was not fearful, but it was veiled. To enter Annwn was to step across the boundary of the ordinary, into a realm where human senses struggled to take in the splendor. Yet one could not remain there unchanged. Those who returned carried with them echoes of its strangeness, a reminder that life and death, mortal and immortal, were separated only by the thinnest of veils. The Welsh bards often spoke of journeys to Annwn. In one of the most famous poems, Prado Annwn, The Spoils of Annwn, Taliesin recounts a voyage to this realm in search of a cauldron of inspiration and rebirth. The poem is obscure and fragmentary, yet its imagery is powerful. It describes a company of warriors venturing into Annwn, facing trials and returning with only a few survivors. The cauldron they sought was said to be warmed by the breath of 9 maidens, never boiling a coward's food. Here again, Annwn is not presented as a place of torment, but as a source of deep, hidden power. One may ask, what is Annwn truly? Is it an underworld of the dead? Is it a land of gods? Is it a poetic landscape of mystery? The tales never fully resolve these questions. They leave Annwn suspended between categories, neither heaven nor hell, neither mortal nor divine. Perhaps its purpose was precisely this, to embody the mystery of what lies beyond. By refusing to define it too clearly, the Welsh tradition allowed Annwn to remain an open space for reflection, a symbol of the unknown that follows life. In folklore, the spectral hounds of Annwn were sometimes said to ride the skies during storms or on nights of mystery. Their cries were not always an omen of doom. At times they were simply signs of the otherworld brushing against this one. The starlit hunt of Annwn, sweeping across the heavens, became a vision of both wonder and unease. To hear the hounds was to be reminded of Annwn's nearness. Even in the ordinary world, the hidden realm was only a breath away. Annwn's legacy lingers even today in Welsh storytelling and in the broader imagination of Celtic myth. It is the otherworld that resists simplification, that refuses to be locked into categories of light and darkness. It whispers of a realm where beauty and death, treasure and loss, feast and silence coexist. And so Annwn rests in mystery, Not dreadful, not cruel, but elusive, a realm that invites thought, yet never yields its secrets fully. Perhaps, as one listens to the imagined cries of spectral hounds, racing beneath the stars, one senses not terror, but awe. Perhaps Annwn is not a destination, but a reminder that mystery itself is sacred, and that the beyond is as near as the night sky above. Chapter 9. Tir na Nog, the land of eternal youth. Among the Irish tales of the otherworld, none shines brighter than the vision of Tir na Nog, the land of eternal youth. It is a place of unending beauty, where time itself loses its weight. In poetry and folklore, it lies across the Western Sea, a realm not far from the mortal world, yet forever beyond reach. Sailors dreamed of it, poets sang of it, and storytellers wove it into the fabric of Ireland's imagination. Tir na Nog was not a dark or punishing afterlife. Instead, it was a paradise. It was the place of eternal delight, where sickness and death could not enter. Its meadows were always green, its trees heavy with blossom, its air filled with music that never faded. To step ashore, there was to step outside of human frailty, to leave behind age, weariness, and sorrow. But like all paradises, it was also tinged with danger. What is perfect may not be meant for mortal hands to hold. The most famous story of Tir na Nog is the tale of Oisin and Niam. Oisin was the son of Fionn mac Cumhail, leader of the Fianna, the warrior band celebrated in Irish legend. One day, as the Fianna hunted along the coast, a woman approached them on a horse as white as snow. Her name was Niamh, and her beauty surpassed anything they had ever seen. She wore a cloak of shining silk, and her golden hair flowed like sunlight over her shoulders. Niamh declared that she came from Tir na Nog. She sought Oisin as her companion, to ride with her across the sea to her homeland. At first, Oisin hesitated, torn between his people and the promise of wonder. But Niamh's words painted visions of a place where no one ever grew old, where joy never faded, where love endured without end. At last he agreed. Together they mounted her white horse, and across the waves they rode, the sea opening gently before them. The journey itself was part of the magic. In some tellings they passed islands filled with marvels, one where laughter never ceased, one where sorrow was unknown, one where warriors battled forever without dying. Each was a fragment of otherworldly existence. But Tir na Nog was greater still. When at last they reached its shores, Oisin was dazzled. Flowers bloomed in endless fields. Music floated on the air, as if the land itself sang. Days were filled with feast and festival, nights with stories and starlight. With Niamh, he knew no weariness, no shadow of time. For Oisin, life in Tir na Nog seemed endless, a dream without ending. Yet in time, a quiet longing stirred within him. He began to think of Ireland, of his father, of the Fianna, and of the life he had left behind. Though Niamh warned him of the danger, Oisin begged her for permission to return, if only for a short while, to see his people once more. At last, she relented, but with a warning that he must not set foot upon the ground. She gave him her white horse and told him to remain always in the saddle. Only then would he be safe from time's cruel touch. Oisin rode across the sea and reached the green shores of Ireland. But what he found was not the land he remembered. Centuries had passed. The Fianna were gone. Fionn and his warriors, his companions, all had faded into legend. The hills and fields were the same, yet changed beyond recognition. Strangers looked upon Oisin as though he were a figure from myth. His heart was heavy with grief, but still he obeyed Niamh's warning and stayed upon the horse. Then, fate intervened. In one version, he leaned from the saddle to help men lift a heavy stone. In another, he simply touched the ground in sorrow. In that instant, the magic of Tir na Nog abandoned him. The centuries he had escaped rushed upon him at once. His body withered. His hair turned white. He fell to the earth, no longer a shining youth but an old man, frail and broken. The tale of Oisin's return captures the haunting beauty of Tir na Nog. It is a realm of eternal youth, but it cannot be held forever by mortal hands. The story reminds us that paradise and exile can be one and the same. To gain what lies beyond time may mean to lose what lies within it. The theme of time distortion is central to the story. In Tir na Nog, Oisin spent what felt like only a few short years. Yet in the mortal world, centuries slipped away. This motif is found across many mythologies. In Japan, the tale of Urashima Taro tells of a fisherman who visits the undersea palace of the Dragon King. only to find, upon returning, that centuries have passed. In Norse legend, too, there are hints of feasting halls where time moves differently. Such stories reflect an ancient human awareness of how fragile our time truly is. They whisper that beyond the edges of this world, time may not obey the same laws. Tir na Nog also embodies the universal human longing for youth, beauty, and love without end. It answers the question that lingers in every heart. What if we could escape decay? What if we could remain young forever? Yet the story of Oisin offers a gentle caution. Eternal youth may dazzle, but it severs us from the natural rhythms of life. It removes us from family, from history, from the cycles that bind us to one another. To live outside of time is also to live apart. And so the story closes in reflection. Oisin, in his old age, is said to have told his tale to St. Patrick, who listened with wonder. Some versions say he converted before his death, others that he passed away still longing for Neve. What endures is not the detail, but the feeling, the ache of paradise glimpsed and lost. Tir na Nog remains one of Ireland's most beloved visions of the other world. It is a land of eternal youth, a promise of beauty unbroken by time, yet it is also a reminder of the delicate balance between longing and loss. The story of Oisin and Niamh tells us that paradise is not only a place across the sea, but also a dream within the human heart, fragile, luminous, and always just beyond reach. Perhaps the real mystery is not whether Tir na Nog exists, but why we continue to dream of it. Perhaps it endures because it reflects a truth we all feel, that youth and love are fleeting, yet so beautiful that we cannot help but imagine a world where they endure forever. Chapter 10, Mag Mell, the Plane of Delight. Among the visions of the Irish otherworld, there lies one of gentle brightness, a realm not of stern judgment or shadowed trials, but of music, sunlight, and eternal joy. It is called Mag Mell, the Plane of Delight. Unlike the distant and mysterious Tir na Nog, Mag Mell was sometimes imagined as closer, a place that brushed against the mortal world. Sailors, poets, and wandering heroes were said to glimpse its shores, finding within it a paradise where sorrow never took root. Mag Mell, in the Old Irish language, means the plain of joy or delight. It was not a land of distant exile or unreachable transcendence, but a realm that seemed almost woven into the very rhythm of Ireland's landscape. It was imagined as a place of soft meadows, eternal summer, and the constant sound of sweet music drifting across the air. In its fields, heroes feasted. Warriors found rest after battle. Lovers found reunion. The story suggests that Mag Mell was not bound to the laws of time or mortality. Here, youth was preserved, wounds forgotten, and harmony restored. Unlike many afterlife traditions across the world, Mag Mell was not a place of moral judgment. It was not awarded for virtue or denied for sin. It was, instead, a kind of otherworldly refuge, a land where the chosen, the gifted, or the fortunate might arrive. Some accounts suggest it was reached only by invitation from divine or fairy hosts. Others tell of brave voyagers stumbling upon it in their journeys across the sea. Always, it was presented as a place where the world's harshness dissolved into light. The bards described Mag Mell with imagery of abundance. Meadows stretched as far as the eye could see, rich with flowers that never faded. The sky glowed with a soft and steady radiance, neither blinding sun nor darkened night, but a perpetual golden hue. The air was filled with music, harps and voices rising without effort, melodies that seemed less played than breathed by the land itself. Feasts were laid across long tables, food and drink never ending, cups brimming as though refilled by unseen hands. What does it mean for a culture to imagine such a place? In Mag Mell, one sees a reflection of the Irish love for hospitality, for gathering, for the joyful rhythm of feasting and storytelling. Unlike the strict paradises of some religions, defined by law or reward, Mag Mell is simple and human, a meadow of eternal summer, where laughter and music continue without end. Tales of heroes often place them in Mag Mell, or at least allowed them to pass through it. In some stories, figures such as Bran MacFaibale, the voyager who sails across the sea in search of wonder, glimpse Mag Mell in their journeys. Others, like Cuchulainn, the great warrior of Ulster, are described as encountering its light through dreams or visions. The visits were brief, fleeting yet powerful, reminding mortals that delight and rest lay just beyond the veil of ordinary life. Mag Mell can be seen as a balancing vision alongside harsher myths of the afterlife. In Celtic tradition, as in many cultures, there were tales of punishment, of dangerous underworld journeys, of shadows and ordeals. Yet Mag Mell stood as the counterpoint, a reassurance that beyond hardship and grief, there also existed a plane of delight. Its presence in story offered hope, that death need not be darkness, that the soul might find its way to gentle fields, to song, to light without end. The imagery of Mag Mell has led many to see it as a kind of Irish paradise, though with its own unique character. It did not rest upon judgment, nor was it earned through piety. It was not distant and inaccessible, but rather always near, brushing the edges of the visible world. Perhaps this is why it was described so often as lying over the sea, a place one could almost glimpse on the horizon, though never quite reached by ordinary means. Its influence can be felt in later visions of heaven that appear in Christian Ireland, where the promise of eternal rest and joy became central to faith. Yet Mag Mell retains its own texture, rooted in the pre-Christian imagination, tied to fields, music, feasts, and a summer without end. Where other paradises lift the soul away from the body, Mag Mell embraces the senses: sight, sound, taste, touch, and the shared warmth of companionship. To imagine Mag Mell is to imagine a world freed of decay, where the seasons do not wither into autumn, where no one grows weary, where every gathering is a festival. Yet there is also a quiet depth to its simplicity. It does not speak of gold or jewels, of power or dominion. It speaks instead of soft grass beneath the feet, of voices raised in song, of sunlight that never fades. Perhaps that is why the idea endures. Human beings do not only long for glory or victory, they long more quietly for delight, for rest, for reunion, for the gentle summer that never ends. Mag Mell, in its eternal meadows, gives voice to that longing. And so, in the Irish imagination, Mag Mell remained not a threat or a test, but a promise that somewhere beyond the horizon lies a plain of joy, untouched by grief, waiting with open fields and unending song. At the close of such stories, one cannot help but wonder, if a meadow of eternal delight truly exists, is it a place the soul will one day reach, or is it already within us? A memory of joy, a vision of peace, carried like a hidden song in the heart. Chapter 11, Ancestors and the Presence of the Dead. In Celtic tradition, the dead were never imagined as entirely gone. They lingered, not as fearful ghosts or hostile shades, but as part of a living continuity that bound the present to the past. To the Celts, ancestors were not merely memories, they were presences, woven into the fabric of daily life, guardians of fields, hearths, and families. In this way, death did not sever a line. It extended it, carrying it into a quieter, unseen world that still touched the living. Archaeology offers many glimpses into this reverence. Across the Celtic world, burial mounds and cairns were raised, not only to honor the dead, but to establish a kind of eternal dwelling place. These great earthworks dotted the landscape of Ireland, Britain, and Gaul. They were visible reminders that the ancestors were near. To pass by such a mound was to pass by a threshold, a doorway through which the living might sense the nearness of those who had walked before. Many were aligned with solstices and equinoxes, suggesting that the Celts tied the memory of the dead to the great cycles of the sun, the seasons, and the eternal rhythms of renewal. The connection between the living and the departed was not abstract. It shaped rituals of inheritance, land, and kinship. Families traced their lineage with care, remembering those who had established their place in the world. Tales preserved in Irish law speak of founders and forebears whose deeds were retold across generations. The names of ancestors were spoken at feasts, carried in song, or etched into stories that blurred history with myth. To remember an ancestor was not only to recall their deeds, but to keep their presence alive in the community. One of the most striking aspects of Celtic belief is how close the dead were imagined to be. Unlike traditions that sent the departed to distant heavens or underworlds, Celtic lore often suggested that souls remained near. They lingered in mounds, in hills, in the silent edges of the home. This closeness was not fearful. It was protective. The ancestors were guardians, sometimes seen as mediators between the human and the divine. In this way, the Celts saw family not as bound by a single lifetime, but as a chain stretching backward and forward, each link held together by shared blood and memory. Festivals marked this nearness. The Feast of Samhain, at the turning of autumn into winter, was the moment when the veil between the living and the dead was said to thin. Fires were lit, offerings placed, and households made space for the unseen. The souls of ancestors were welcomed, not rejected. Their return was part of the rhythm of the year, a reminder that the living walked always in the company of the dead. In this way, Samhain was not only about spirits wandering, but about ancestors visiting, joining once more in the cycle of family and community. Philosophy, too, reinforced this closeness. Classical writers such as Lucan, who described the Druids, noted that the Celts believed in the survival of the soul after death. For them, death was not an end but a passage. The soul continued, and the bond between kin was not dissolved by the grave. This belief offered courage in battle, comfort in mourning, and structure in ritual. Warriors marched, knowing that death would not sever them from their people. Families grieved, knowing that their loved ones still lingered nearby. In the mythic tales, ancestors often took on a luminous role. Some appeared as guides, leading heroes into the otherworld. Others were transformed into deities, their memory magnified into divine presence. This merging of mortal and divine reflects a worldview in which the boundary between human and sacred was not rigid. To honor ancestors was, in a sense, to honor the sacred itself, the mystery of life that flows through generations, never extinguished. Even the land itself was tied to ancestry. Many hills and rivers bore names connected to legendary forebears. To walk through the countryside was to walk through memory. Place and lineage were bound together, each reinforcing the other. A hill might be the dwelling of an ancestor's spirit. A stone might mark the presence of a founder. The landscape became a map of memory, a living testament to those who had gone before. In this way, Celtic reverence for the dead was both practical and mystical. It shaped law, inheritance, and family bonds, but it also invited a deeper reflection. If the ancestors are never far, then life itself is part of a larger continuity, stretching backward beyond recall and forward beyond imagination. To live, then, was to participate in a chain of being, a flow of presence that no grave could sever. This closeness of the dead raises a question. What does it mean to live, knowing that those before you still walk, unseen, at your side? For the Celts, it meant that one was never truly alone. Every act carried the weight of lineage. Every feast echoed with voices from the past. Every ritual wove the living into the greater fabric of time. Today, echoes of this belief remain. Family names, traditions, and rituals of remembrance continue to link the living with the dead. Cemeteries, memorials, and stories keep alive the sense that we are not separate from those who came before. In Celtic tradition, this was not only memory, it was presence. The dead were not gone. They were here, quietly shaping the world through the bonds of kinship and the rhythms of the land. And so, the Celtic vision of ancestors was not one of absence, but of nearness. The living and the dead formed a single community, one part visible, the other hidden. To walk through a field, to light a fire, to gather in story, all these were ways of joining with those who had once done the same. In their eyes, nothing was lost. The chain endured. Perhaps, then, the deepest message of this tradition is simple, yet profound. We are never truly apart. The ancestors are not behind us, but with us. Not silent, but woven into the very rhythm of life. And if the past remains present in this way, then perhaps the future is already here too, waiting to unfold as part of the same unbroken flow. Chapter 12. Samhain, the Threshold of Worlds. Samhain marked a moment unlike any other in the Celtic year. It was not simply a festival of harvest or an observance of endings. It was a threshold, a hinge in time when the living and the dead, the past and the future, brushed against one another. In the Gaelic calendar, Samhain stood at the beginning of the dark half of the year, the close of the harvest, and the dawning of a new year. To celebrate Samhain was to step into a liminal state, neither wholly in this world nor fully in the next. At its heart, Samhain was a festival of transition. The Celts divided the year into two halves, light and dark, summer and winter. The bright days of growth and labor now gave way to nights of stillness and reflection. In fields, the last sheaves had been gathered, livestock brought close, and fires kindled for protection against the chill. Yet beneath this practical rhythm lay something far deeper. The turning of the year was understood not only as a cycle of seasons, but also as a rhythm of existence itself. The living shared this moment with the spirits of the departed, who were believed to draw near when the boundary between realms grew thin. fires played a central role in Samhain rituals. Bonfires were kindled on high places, casting their glow across hills and valleys. These were not fires for warmth alone, but flames of purification and blessing. Families led cattle between twin fires, believing the smoke would guard the animals through the long winter. Ashes from these communal blazes were carried home, where hearths would be rekindled with their sacred spark. In this way, the fire linked each household to the larger circle of the community and to the continuity of life itself. Offerings were made to unseen guests. Portions of food and drink were set aside for the wandering dead, left at doorsteps, windows, or crossroads. Such gestures were not simply acts of fear or appeasement. They reflected the belief that ancestors and spirits were still part of the community. To neglect them would be to forget the bonds of kinship that extended beyond death. To honor them was to affirm the idea that life and death were not opposites, but threads of one continuous fabric. There was also a recognition that not all presences were benign. Celtic lore tells of beings who moved freely at Samhain, fair folk, restless souls, and otherworldly figures who might bring harm or mischief. Masks and disguises were sometimes worn, both to confuse such spirits and to embody them in ritual play. By becoming the strange and the uncanny for a moment, the community acknowledged the wildness of the other world while keeping it at a safe distance. Mythic tales often return to Samhain as the setting for encounters with the beyond. Heroes and kings are said to have faced visions or battles on this night, crossing into realms unseen. The theme is always one of passage, of standing at the edge of what is known, when the fabric of reality itself seems pliable. Just as the year turned over, so too could fate, destiny, and the bonds between the living and the dead shift and rearrange. Anthropologists and historians see in Samhain echoes of an ancient pattern. Societies across the world often mark the shift from harvest to winter with rituals that invoke the dead. It was a natural moment to reflect on mortality, for the land itself entered dormancy. Crops were cut down, leaves withered, and light faded. Against this backdrop, to sense the presence of ancestors was to remind oneself that decline was not the end. Death, like winter, was part of a cycle that led back again to renewal. The liminal quality of Samhain carried both caution and comfort. It was a time when people were careful, watching for signs, respecting omens, guarding their homes with ritual. Yet it was also a time of gathering, storytelling, and remembrance. Around fires, tales of the gods, of heroes, and of those who had passed were retold, weaving memory into the present. Through story, the departed were not gone. They lingered in words, in echoes, in the attentive silence of those who listened. The idea of the veil thinning at Samhain has endured across centuries. Though expressed differently in modern traditions, the sense remains that there are moments when the boundary between the living and the dead grows delicate and contact is possible. Whether one interprets this as spiritual presence, psychological memory, or cultural ritual, it speaks to a universal longing. The human heart yearns to believe that loved ones are never wholly lost, that communication across the threshold of mortality may still occur. The symbolism of Samhain also shaped later traditions. As Christianity spread across Celtic lands, the Church placed All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day close to this season, merging new rituals with old. The act of lighting candles for the dead, of visiting graves, and of praying for souls echoed earlier practices of leaving offerings and kindling fires. The continuity is striking, suggesting that beneath new names and forms, the same human impulse endured, to remember, to honor, and to keep alive the connection between the living and those who had gone before. Today, echoes of Samhain live on in modern Halloween, though often softened into playful imagery of costumes and lanterns. Yet behind the masks and symbols remains the trace of something more ancient. The awareness of mystery at the heart of the season. The flickering of a candle in the night, the laughter of voices around a fire, the quiet pause to think of those who are no longer here. All carry within them a whisper of Samhain's essence. What makes Samhain enduring is not only its place in Celtic myth or ritual, it is the way it captures a fundamental truth about human life. That endings are never simple endings, that darkness is always bound with light, and that the presence of the dead continues to shape the living. Each autumn, as leaves fall and the air sharpens, this truth is felt again, as if woven into the very turning of the earth. Samhain was not about fear of death, but about acceptance of its place within the cycle of being. To gather around the fire, to leave food at the door, to tell stories of ancestors. These were not acts of despair, but of belonging. They declared that even as winter came, life persisted in memory, in kinship, in spirit. And so, as the embers dimmed and the year turned over, the Celts stood at the threshold. Before them stretched the dark season, long nights and hidden growth. Behind them lay the warmth of harvest and summer's light. Between these, just for a moment, worlds touched. It was here, at Samhain, that the mystery of life and death was most deeply felt. Perhaps this is why the image endures, a circle of fire glowing against the autumn night, offerings laid out in quiet reverence, and the hush of unseen presences moving gently near. In that stillness, one wonders, when the veil grows thin, do we remember them, or do they remember us? Chapter 13, Burial Rites and Grave Offerings. Across the Celtic world, the way the dead were laid to rest reveals much about how life, death, and the unseen beyond were understood. To bury the body was not simply to dispose of what remained. It was to guide the soul, to prepare it for a journey, and to anchor memory in the land itself. Each grave, whether humble or monumental, became a doorway, a meeting place between this world and the next. Archaeology has uncovered a wide range of Celtic burial practices. In some regions, cremation was common, with ashes placed in urns and carefully buried in the earth. In others, the body was laid intact, often in a crouched or extended position, accompanied by objects of value. These objects, known as grave goods, varied greatly in form and richness. Yet their presence carried a consistent meaning: the belief that the dead would continue in some form of existence where such items retained their worth. Weapons were frequently placed with the departed, particularly with men of warrior rank. Swords, shields, and spears were buried beside them, sometimes carefully bent or broken. Scholars debate this detail. Was the weapon symbolically killed, ensuring it served only the one it had belonged to? Or was it a gesture acknowledging that tools of war, while essential in life, no longer had a role in the realm of the dead? Whatever the answer, the act speaks to the close bond between identity and possession. A warrior was not imagined apart from his arms, even in death. Food and drink offerings were also common. Vessels of grain, meat, or ale accompanied the body, as though preparing the deceased for a journey or feast beyond the grave. To the living, it may have been a way of expressing care, a reminder that the bond of hospitality extended even into the silence of the tomb. To the soul, it may have been reassurance, that sustenance awaited in the land beyond, where ancestors gathered and tables were never empty. Jewelry, ornaments, and clothing fragments also appear in burials. These were not merely tokens of wealth. They were emblems of beauty, status, and continuity. In Celtic culture, where personal adornment carried deep symbolic weight, to send the dead with such treasures was to affirm their dignity in the next realm. A finely wrought torque, a brooch, or a decorated cup was more than an object. It was a statement that the individual's essence, their identity and honor, endured. Some burials reached extraordinary scale. The great mound tombs, such as those found at Newgrange and Noath in Ireland, speak of monumental effort and cosmic symbolism. Built with precise alignments to the sun and stars, these tombs were not only resting places, but also calendars and sanctuaries of light. At Newgrange, the passage aligns with the rising sun of the winter solstice. For a few moments each year, sunlight pierces the chamber, flooding it with gold. Such a design suggests a profound link between the cycle of the cosmos and the fate of the dead, as if the tomb itself declared that life, even in death, was joined to the eternal rhythm of the heavens. Graves also speak of social structure. Lavish burials with gold, chariots, and imported goods reveal the presence of elites whose memory was enshrined with grandeur. Simpler graves, marked by modest offerings, suggest that even the humblest life was honored with care. The contrast reflects both hierarchy and shared values. Regardless of wealth or station, burial was a sacred act. The dead were entrusted to the earth with tokens that spoke of life, love, and continuity. In the Celtic imagination, the earth itself was not a cold prison for the dead, but a cradle. The soil that nourished crops and sustained herds was the same soil that received the departed. Burial was a return, a reunion with the great mother of all. The tomb, whether a mound or a simple pit, was both womb and threshold. It held the dead in stillness, while also suggesting rebirth, transformation, or passage into another realm. Anthropologists point out that burial customs serve the living as much as the dead. To give offerings, to prepare a body with care, is also to ease grief and to reaffirm community. The ceremony binds the mourners together, offering a moment to reflect on what continues even when a life has ended. Objects placed in graves tell us not only what was believed about the afterlife, but also what was cherished in life. The sword, the cup, the ornament, each is a memory, a fragment of identity entrusted to eternity. The presence of grave goods raises enduring questions. Did the Celts believe that these items were used literally in the other world, or were they symbolic guides? Were they meant to provide comfort, to assert status, or to bridge the worlds of the living and the dead? Archaeology offers clues, but certainty remains elusive. Perhaps that is the nature of death itself, always half hidden, always just beyond full comprehension. Even today, when archaeologists unearth such tombs, the offerings carry a strange, timeless weight. A corroded sword, a cracked pot of grain, a necklace dulled by centuries of soil. These remnants still speak. They remind us that those who came before longed for continuity, for care, for remembrance. They remind us that the act of burying the dead is never only about the past. It is always about the future, about ensuring that life and memory flow on. To reflect on these rites is to sense a deep human truth, that death is not an erasure, but a passage. Burial, in its many forms, declares that the story continues, that the bonds of kinship and care extend beyond the grave. The earth receives the body, but the spirit, it seems, carries the gifts forward. And so, in the quiet of an ancient mound, or in the simplicity of a forgotten grave, one may still feel the resonance of these offerings. They are tokens of hope, gestures of love, and whispers of a belief that the soul does not walk alone. The earth holds the dead, yes, but perhaps also carries them onward into a mystery we have yet to see. Chapter 14. Megaliths and Stone Portals. Across the rolling landscapes of Ireland and beyond, vast stones rise from the earth, weathered by time, yet still holding their silent watch. These megaliths, carved and positioned thousands of years ago, carry meanings that stretch beyond the practical. To the ancient Celts, and to those who came before them, such structures were not merely stone and soil. They were thresholds, portals between the living world and the unseen, between the cycles of nature and the enduring path of the soul. Among the most striking of these is Newgrange, a passage tomb older than the pyramids of Egypt. Its great mound, built with layers of stone and earth, holds within it a long, narrow corridor leading to a central chamber. For most of the year, this chamber lies in darkness, sealed from the outer world. But on the mornings surrounding the winter solstice, the rising sun aligns perfectly with the passage. A beam of light enters, slowly traveling along the floor until it illuminates the heart of the tomb. For a few brief minutes, the chamber glows with golden light, as though day itself has entered the realm of the dead. This phenomenon was no accident. The builders aligned stone and passage with painstaking precision. To them, light was not only natural but sacred. The solstice, the turning point of the year, marked the rebirth of the sun, the renewal of the cycle. To allow the dawn into the tomb was to declare that life persists, that even in the deepest darkness, a return of light is certain. For the dead entombed within the earth, this beam may have symbolized a path forward, a guide for the soul's journey into other realms. Other passage tombs across Ireland and Britain share similar patterns. At Knowth and Loughcrew, alignments to sunrise and sunset reveal a deep understanding of cosmic rhythm. These structures were not built simply to hold the dead. They were built to link the human story with the movements of the heavens. In their presence, time feels both ancient and immediate. One can imagine communities gathering in the cold dawn, watching the first light pierce the tomb, believing they were witnessing not only the return of the sun, but the confirmation that death too was part of a greater cycle. Standing stones scattered across fields and hills carry the same aura of mystery. Some are solitary, rising alone against the horizon. Others form circles, their shapes marking celestial patterns. Their placement suggests more than chance. Many align with the solstices, the equinoxes, or the rising and setting points of significant stars. For ancient peoples, these stones were not inert. They were markers of cosmic order, guardians of memory, and perhaps channels through which the spirits of the ancestors could be felt. The Celts, inheriting these monuments, wove them into their own spiritual landscape. To them, the stones may have been places where the veil between worlds was thin. A solitary stone in a meadow could be seen as a sentinel, holding the presence of a forebear. A circle of stones, open to the sky, might serve as a gathering point for ritual, a place where community and cosmos met. In the quiet presence of these stones, the living may have sensed the nearness of the dead, not as shadows, but as companions standing just beyond sight. It is striking to reflect on the labor involved. To quarry, transport, and raise stones weighing many tons required immense communal effort. Yet the effort was made, generation after generation. Such devotion speaks to the meaning these structures held. They were not temporary shrines. They were built to endure, to stand through centuries, to outlast the lives of those who raised them. In this way, they carried a promise that memory and spirit would remain, grounded in stone and aligned with sky. The carvings found on some of these stones deepen the sense of mystery. Spirals, concentric circles, zigzags, and lozenges cover the surfaces of curbstones and passage walls. Scholars debate their meaning. Were they records of celestial observations, symbolic maps of journeys, or abstract expressions of the eternal? The spiral, in particular, recurs often. It may have signified the cycle of life and death, or the turning of the sun through the seasons. Perhaps it suggested the soul's own path, ever winding, never ending. To stand within such a tomb or before such a stone is to feel both humbled and unsettled. The silence is heavy, yet it is not empty. The stones seem to hold memory, as though each one bears witness to lives once lived and to rituals long forgotten. Even now, thousands of years after their construction, these monuments invite the same questions. Why here? Why aligned to the stars? What did the builders believe happened when the soul passed through the threshold of death? The metaphor of the portal is powerful. For the Celts, as for many ancient peoples, stone was not simply stone. It was a doorway. A passage tomb was not only a grave, but a bridge. The beam of solstice light was not merely sunlight, but a guide, leading the spirit into renewal. The circle of stones was not merely an arrangement of rocks, but a cosmic mirror, reflecting the order of the heavens upon the earth. Even today, visitors who gather at Newgrange for the winter solstice describe the experience with awe. As the light enters the chamber, silence falls. For a few minutes, those present feel connected to something far older and greater than themselves. The same sense must have filled the hearts of those who built it. In the coldest, darkest days of the year, the stones promised that light would return to the land, to the people, and perhaps to the soul itself. These megaliths endure not only as archaeological wonders, but as reminders of a worldview deeply attuned to rhythm, memory, and mystery. They whisper that the human desire to link life with eternity is ancient. They suggest that the dead were never thought to vanish into silence, but to step across a threshold, guided by light, remembered by stone, embraced by the earth. And so, the great monuments stand, their purpose half known, their silence profound. They remind us that, long ago, people sought to build not only for life, but for what lies beyond. They remind us that even the heaviest stone can serve as a door, if one believes that the soul must pass through. Perhaps the dawn that fills a tomb with gold is more than a marvel of alignment. Perhaps it is a message left in stone, that death itself, like winter, is not an ending, but a waiting. That in time, light returns. That in silence, a new journey begins. Chapter 15, The Hero's Journey to the Otherworld. In the mythic traditions of Ireland and beyond, the Otherworld was not a distant, unreachable place. It lay close, hidden behind veils of mist across the sea, or just beyond the threshold of vision. Heroes were often the ones chosen to glimpse it. Through courage, tragedy, or divine calling, they crossed into realms where ordinary mortals could not tread. These tales were not just stories of adventure. They carried the echoes of spiritual truths, shaping how people imagined death, rebirth, and the courage needed to face both. One of the earliest and most enduring of these stories is the voyage of Bran Mac Mell. In Irish tradition, he hears mysterious music that lulls him into sleep. When he awakens, he finds a silver branch in his hand, glittering with blossoms. Soon after, a woman of the other world appears to him, singing of a distant land where sorrow does not reach, where feasts never end, and where time flows differently than in the mortal world. She invites him to sail across the sea to this immortal realm. Bran gathers companions and sets out upon the waters. The voyage becomes both physical and spiritual. On the waves, they encounter islands of delight and strangeness, one where laughter never ceases, another where feasting is eternal. Yet when Bran returns home centuries later, the people no longer know his name. Time has passed, and his own land has changed beyond recognition. The silver branch is proof of his journey, but he himself is now out of place, belonging neither fully to the mortal world nor to the eternal one. The voyage of Bran reflects an ancient belief that the other world is both a place of wonder and a realm of loss. To glimpse it is to step outside time, and in doing so, one risks never returning to the familiar. What does it mean that joy without sorrow can be just as disorienting as sorrow itself? Perhaps the story suggests that eternity, stripped of change, becomes alien to human beings, who are shaped by seasons, cycles, and the passage of years. Another tale carries the same shimmering threshold between worlds. The story of Connla, son of Conn of the 100 Battles. Connla is approached by a woman from the other world, who offers him an apple that never diminishes, no matter how much he eats. She promises him a life of unending youth in her land, free from decay or death. His father, the great king, is troubled by her words. He summons druids to ward off her spell, but Connla feels her pull deep within his heart. Finally, he departs with her in a crystal boat, vanishing across the sea, never to return. Connla's story is quieter than Bran's, but perhaps even more haunting. There is no grand voyage, no long string of islands to explore. There is only the choice between staying in the mortal world, with its impermanence and its grief, or leaving it all behind for an eternal, changeless paradise. Connla's decision leaves us with an unease that lingers. Is eternal youth a blessing, or a loss of something more profoundly human? The tale leaves the question open, echoing in the silence after Connla's boat disappears beyond the horizon. If Bran and Connla represent the gentle pull of the other world, the hero Cuchulainn brings a different perspective, the warrior's threshold between life and death. Known for his fierce courage and tragic destiny, Cuchulainn's encounters with the other world often blur the line between dream and vision, between reality and fate. In one tale, he is drawn into a mysterious training journey with the warrior woman Scathach, who resides in a shadowed realm that feels more like the border of life and death than the lands of the living. There he learns the skills that make him nearly invincible, but also seal the path toward his own early demise. In other traditions, Cuchulainn is lured by beautiful women from the other world, who bring him into realms where time bends, where love and battle intermingle, and where he is reminded of his mortality even at the height of his power. His fate, tied always to thresholds and transitions, makes him the ultimate figure of the warrior who straddles two worlds, one of fleeting human glory, the other of eternal remembrance. These stories of voyages and crossings are not simply entertainment. They reflect deep cultural understandings of life and death. For the ancient Irish, the sea was not just a boundary of land. It was a liminal space, a vast shifting mirror of the soul. To sail into its horizon was to surrender to mystery. Islands glimpsed on the water's edge became symbols of the other world, close enough to see, but unreachable unless called by fate or divine invitation. The symbolism of thresholds runs throughout these myths. A silver branch, a crystal boat, a woman's beckoning voice, all are tokens of passage. They remind us that courage is not only found in battle, but also in the willingness to step across into the unknown. The heroes of these tales do not conquer death. Instead, they embody the bravery of encountering it, of seeing what lies beyond without shrinking back. Such tales also provided the living with glimpses of the afterlife, not as abstract philosophy but as vivid encounters. The otherworld was not imagined as punishment or judgment, as in later Christian thought. It was instead a place of beauty, youth, and timelessness. Yet with its own dangers, its own alienness, it was not always a reward, nor always a loss. It was a mirror of human longing for permanence, and a reminder that permanence can be as strange as impermanence itself. Reflect for a moment on the quiet courage of Connla, sailing away in silence, and the restless fate of Cuchulainn, always pulled between shadow and light. Both embody a truth, that crossing into the other world is not just about leaving behind the mortal realm, but about embracing the mystery of change itself. Bravery in these stories is not the absence of fear, it is the willingness to walk into uncertainty, whether through seas that stretch beyond sight, or through the thresholds of vision and dream. In this sense, the hero's journey to the other world is also the journey each person faces in life's final transition. And so these myths close softly, not with triumph, but with a kind of reverent wonder. The heroes are gone, the voyage is complete, but their stories remain, reminding us that courage is needed not only for battlefields and trials, but for the quiet, inevitable crossing that awaits all souls. Chapter 16, Gods and Goddesses of Death and Renewal. Across Celtic and wider European traditions, gods and goddesses of death did not only preside over endings, they were guardians of transitions, keepers of thresholds, and figures who held within themselves both decay and renewal. In their myths and in their worship, death was never viewed in isolation. It was intertwined with fertility, with the cycles of nature, and with the mysterious turning of time. These divine beings embodied the truth that what falls must rise again, and that every departure carries within it the seed of return. Among the most enigmatic of these figures is the Morrigan, the great phantom queen of Irish tradition. She is often seen on battlefields, a dark shape above the clash of armies, foretelling doom or granting victory. Her presence evokes dread, yet it also signals transformation. She does not simply revel in death, she ensures that death becomes part of the ongoing cycle, clearing the field for what is to come. In some tales, she takes the form of a crow or raven, settling upon the shoulders of the dying. In others, she appears as a striking woman, weaving fate itself into the lives of warriors. The Morrigan is not only a goddess of destruction, she is also linked to sovereignty, to fertility, and to the land itself. When she unites with kings, the land prospers. When she turns away, the land withers. Her duality shows how the Celts perceived death and battle, not as meaningless violence, but as part of a larger balance. In her, death and life are intertwined, inseparable. She is the terror of endings, but also the mother of renewal. Another figure who reveals this cycle is Donn, sometimes called the Dark One, or Lord of the Dead. In Irish tradition, Donn is said to dwell on a western island, Tech Duin, the House of Donn. To this place the souls of the dead were believed to travel. Some traditions suggest that all who die in Ireland must pass through Donn's domain before moving onward. His house is not a place of punishment, but of passage, a station where the soul lingers before continuing into the next stage. The connection of Donn to the West is significant. Across cultures, the West, where the sun sets, is a symbol of decline and of endings. Yet it is also where the sun returns, rising again after its descent. Thus Donn's role embodies not only the darkness of death, but also the promise of continuation. His island becomes a threshold, both a farewell and a gateway. To imagine every soul passing through his keeping is to imagine death as guided, watched, and never without direction. Across the sea, in Welsh tradition, another guide of souls appears, Gwyn ap Nudd. Gwyn is described as a ruler of the otherworld, a leader of the spectral hunt that rides across the skies, collecting the souls of the departed. He is a liminal figure, both feared and revered. Though often associated with battle and death, he also ensures balance between the forces of light and darkness. Without his presence, the living and the dead would lose their boundaries, spilling into one another. Gwyn ap Nudd's name carries echoes of brightness, Gwyn meaning white or fair, yet his role is bound to shadow. He represents the paradox of a figure who is both luminous and terrifying, a reminder that the passage into death is both a loss and a revelation. His wild hunt may strike fear, but it is also a sign of order within chaos, ensuring that souls are guided rather than lost. These deities, Morrigan, Donn, Gwyn ap Nudd, are not isolated figures of death. They are woven into themes of renewal, fertility, and sovereignty. The Morrigan's connection to the land shows that destruction clears space for fertility. Don's House of the Dead reflects the Western cycle of setting and rising. Gwyn ap Nudd's spectral hunt, though grim, prevents the collapse of worlds, protecting the living as much as guiding the dead. To the ancient mind, death was not separate from the rhythms of nature. The withering of crops in autumn, the decay of leaves, the darkening of winter. These were not only endings, but preludes to renewal. Fertility required death, just as spring required winter. The gods and goddesses of death embodied this cycle, reminding worshippers that endings are never final. It is worth pausing to reflect on this. Modern culture often treats death as a breaking point, something absolute and final. Yet in these older traditions, death was a movement, part of a larger rhythm. To die was to be gathered by divine figures who held the soul not in judgment, but in passage. Their presence at thresholds softened the fear of finality, replacing it with mystery and continuity. Perhaps this is why many of these deities embody dualities. The Morrigan is both destroyer and mother of fertility. Don is both Dark Lord and gentle host. Gwyn ap Nudd is both hunter and protector. They are not fixed in a single role, but fluid, shifting like the cycles of nature itself. Their paradoxes mirror the human experience of death, frightening yet natural, sorrowful yet essential for renewal. Imagine for a moment the battlefield, the sky dark with crows, the Morrigan watching silently as lives end, and the land absorbs its sacrifice. Imagine the western horizon, the sun sinking into the sea, every soul passing through Don's house, each farewell wrapped in the glow of dusk. Imagine the spectral host, Gwyn ap Nudd's hunt moving across the night sky, ensuring that none are lost, that all are gathered into the order of things. These images are not simply stories of gods. They are meditations on thresholds. They remind us that death is not emptiness but a crossing, guarded and guided by divine presence. They tell us that fertility is born from decay, that sovereignty comes through union with the land, that even in darkness there is order, and so these deities linger in memory, not only as figures of fear, but as companions of renewal. They watch over the liminal spaces where endings meet beginnings. They remind humanity that every threshold has its guardians, and that no soul passes alone. The Morrigan, Don, and Gwyn ap Nudd whisper the same truth. Death is not the opposite of life. It is part of life's circle, a necessary descent before the rising, and so the chapter closes softly. With this reflection, perhaps the gods of death were never only about endings, but about the eternal rhythm of return. Chapter 17, Don and the Island of the Dead. In the mythology of Ireland, there is a western horizon where sea and sky meet, a place where the sun sinks each evening into its quiet rest. Beyond this line, hidden from the living, lies the realm of Don, the Dark One, Lord of the Dead. His dwelling is known as Tech Duin, the House of Don, an island said to receive the souls of all who die. Unlike fiery underworlds or paradises filled with reward, Tech Duin is not bound to judgment. It is instead a place of gathering, a station where souls pause before moving onward. Don is at once a somber figure and a protective one, the shadow that welcomes all into his keeping. For the ancient Irish, death was not chaos. It was structured, overseen, and guided. The soul, leaving the body, did not wander endlessly. It had a destination, and Don was its host. The traditions surrounding Don are among the oldest layers of Celtic belief. Some scholars suggest that Don may represent an ancestral figure, perhaps even the first of the dead, whose role grew over centuries into that of a divine guardian. In certain tales, all the people of Ireland are said to be descended from him, and thus, at death, they return to their forebear. This reflects a worldview in which ancestry, land, and death are woven into one continuous thread. Tech Duin, his house, is described as lying off the coast, sometimes linked to the rocky island now called Bull Rock near the Beara Peninsula. Fishermen and coastal dwellers spoke of the waves breaking upon that place as the sound of souls being carried across the waters. The Western Sea was not only a geographical horizon, but also a spiritual one. To die was to join the sun's descent, to follow it into the unknown expanse where Don held watch. The island imagery is striking. Isolated, surrounded by the restless sea, it reflects both separation and safety. The waters serve as a boundary, preventing the dead from straying, while also symbolizing the crossing every soul must make. Just as the tides are ceaseless, so too is the movement of souls, wave after wave, each carried to Tek Duin. The rhythm of the sea becomes the rhythm of death itself, inevitable, unending, yet gentle in its persistence. Don himself embodies paradox. He is feared as the dark figure who calls all mortals, but he is also a protector, ensuring that no soul is left untended. To think of him as Lord of the Dead is not to imagine cruelty, but guardianship. The fear he evokes is less about punishment and more about the reminder of life's inescapable end. His presence speaks of certainty. No king or farmer, no warrior or poet escapes his call. And yet in that certainty lies a strange comfort. The House of Don was not only a destination, but also a threshold. Some traditions hold that souls linger there before moving into the other world, a realm of greater mystery and renewal. Others suggest that Tek Duin itself is the final resting place. The ambiguity reflects a broader Celtic view of death, not as a closed door, but as a passage shrouded in mist. The destination is less important than the crossing, and Don's Island provides order to that journey. From an anthropological view, the presence of such a figure echoes across cultures. Many societies imagine the dead crossing water, guided by a psychopomp or guardian. The Greek had Charon ferrying souls across the Styx. The Norse told of Hell's domain beyond the icy rivers. In Ireland, the Westward Sea and Don's Island fulfilled this same function. Water, always shifting, always moving, becomes the metaphor of transition. To step into death is to embark upon a voyage. Consider the image of a soul, departing from the body, carried by invisible currents. It drifts toward the western horizon, where the sun falls, where waves break upon the rocky isle. There, Don waits. Neither cruel nor merciful, he simply receives, as he has since the first ancestors walked the land. Each life ends with this crossing, each death bringing another voice to the whispering tide around his home. Yet Don is not only a figure of endings, he is also linked to fertility and continuity. If all the Irish trace their descent to him, then he is both the root of life and the keeper of death. In this sense, he represents the full cycle. Birth from him, return to him, as though human existence is but a journey away from and back towards the same source. His dual role makes him less a figure of loss and more a reminder of eternal belonging. The island of the dead, Tek Duin, thus becomes more than geography. It is a symbol of stillness beyond life's storms. The restless waves beat against its rocks, but the souls within are held. The living, watching the sunset, see only the surface of the sea, yet they inherit a sense that their journey is guided, not abandoned. The sea becomes a veil, thin and shimmering, covering a hidden continuity. To dwell on Don's image is to confront both fear and comfort. The fear arises from the certainty of his call, the inescapable shadow on every life. The comfort comes from his role as host, as ancestor, as the one who ensures the dead are gathered. Unlike tales of endless wandering or cruel torment, the Irish vision places each soul into a keeping, and perhaps in that lies a gentleness, a reassurance that death is not chaos, but a homecoming. The waves that break on the western shore still echo this belief. Each crest, each retreat, mirrors the endless passage of souls. The sea carries them outward, always outward, toward the horizon where Don's Island stands beyond mortal sight. To imagine this is to soften the fear of death itself, seeing it not as a rupture, but as a return carried upon familiar tides. And so, Don remains in memory, a dark lord, yes, but also a guardian. His house of the dead endures as a reminder that no soul is without destination, no crossing without a watcher. In the stillness of this reflection, one might ask, when the final tide comes, is it not a comfort to believe that a door stands open and that someone waits upon the farthest shore? Chapter 18, Music as a Bridge Between Worlds. In the old traditions of the Celtic lands, sound was not simply entertainment. Music carried weight, meaning, and a subtle power that reached beyond the realm of the living. The voice of the harp, the breath in the pipes, and the trembling notes of a funeral lament were not merely artistic. They were bridges, delicate spans of tone and rhythm, linking this world to what lay beyond. The harp holds a special place in Irish tradition. Ancient sources speak of the harp as the instrument of the gods and of kings, a symbol of authority and harmony. It was said that the strings could move the soul in three ways: to joy, to sorrow, and to sleep. Joy lifted the spirit into brightness. Sorrow deepened the heart, reminding one of loss and longing. Sleep, gentle and final, brought rest, and perhaps, when played at the threshold of death, eased the soul toward its journey into the next world. Pipes too held their power. The drone of the bagpipe, or the lilting song of a wooden flute, could summon both lament and celebration. Their notes were carried across the wind, through valleys and over waters. At funerals, pipes announced the passage of the dead, guiding mourners in shared grief, while also giving shape to the invisible transition of the soul. To hear them was to know that someone had left this world, and yet that they were being carried on with music to the other world. In many Celtic tales, music is eternal in that hidden realm beyond. Poets and storytellers describe the otherworld as a land filled not only with feasting and brightness, but with unending melody. Harps played by unseen hands, voices that never falter, tunes that bring peace and wonder without end. This eternal music was not background but essence. It was the very fabric of that place, a sound that kept all in harmony and timeless balance. For those who believed, death was not an entry into silence, but into a deeper music. Funeral laments, known as keening, were themselves seen as more than grief. Performed by women with voices lifted high, sometimes piercing, sometimes soft, the lament was ritual. It was said to guide the soul, to help it not linger but find its way. The sound carried both mourning and release. Even the rhythm of the wail echoed the waves of the sea, that eternal border between the living and the dead. A voice rising and falling, fading and returning, was more than sorrow. It was a map, a call that shaped the passage of a spirit from one shore to another. Why does sound hold such power in moments of transition? Perhaps because it moves without substance, yet touches deeply. A note can reach places no hand can touch. It can stir memories, loosen grief, or quiet the restless. To hear music at the moment of death may have felt to the ancients like being taken by the hand, drawn not by flesh but by vibration, by resonance, into the unseen. And just as the living used music to guide the dead, they also imagined music flowing in reverse. Dreams told of hearing faint tunes at night, melodies said to drift across from the other world. Sometimes these songs brought wisdom, sometimes sorrow, sometimes simply the knowledge that beyond the veil there was not emptiness, but sound. If one listens in silence, could it be that echoes of that eternal harmony still drift faintly into this world? Sleep itself, often called the little death, was also wrapped in music. Lullabies, soft and rhythmic, imitated the patterns of breath, of waves, of heartbeat. These songs guided children into sleep, just as laments guided souls into death. One realm was temporary, the other permanent. Yet both passages were accompanied by the same gentle art of sound. Sleep, death, and renewal were bound together by rhythm and tone, as though the universe itself kept time with a hidden song. To imagine death with music is to imagine it not as rupture, but as transition. The harsh silence of loss softens when filled with song. The living remember, the dead journey on, and the boundary between worlds becomes a place not of fear, but of resonance. The Celts, through harps, pipes, and lament, turned the inexpressible mystery of death into something audible, something shared. Even now, in moments of grief or remembrance, people still turn instinctively to music. A hymn, a folk song, a lone instrument playing in the quiet. Each can speak to the heart when words fail. The ancients knew this, and in their stories, they carried it further. They believed that music did not end at the grave. It continued, echoing, leading onward into a realm where sound is everlasting. And so, in reflecting on their traditions, one might ask, if the soul is indeed carried by music, what song do you think would guide yours? Would it be a harp, bright and clear? A pipe, solemn and deep? Or perhaps only the sound of the waves, rising and falling, as if the world itself were singing you into rest? Chapter 19. Dreams and Prophecies of the Afterlife. In the Celtic imagination, dreams were never dismissed as fleeting shadows of the mind. They were understood as doorways, subtle thresholds where the human soul might glimpse truths hidden from waking eyes. To dream was to wander, to dream was to travel, and at times, to dream was to see beyond death. The Druids, keepers of wisdom and mediators of the unseen, held dreams in deep regard. They were not seen as accidents of sleep, but as signs, omens, and at times direct revelations from the otherworld. A seer might close their eyes and receive a vision that foretold not only the fates of men, but the journeys of souls. These dreams carried the weight of prophecy, shaping decisions of rulers and guiding rituals meant to prepare for both life and the afterlife. Sleep itself was often called a brother of death. Both silenced the body. Both carried the mind into realms beyond waking. To fall asleep was to practice, in some gentle way, the surrender that would one day be required at death. For the Celts, this bond between sleep and death was not fearful but natural. Just as night follows day, and just as winter follows autumn, so too did death follow life. And in both death and sleep, dreams might reveal the path ahead. In tales recorded centuries later, heroes often received warnings or blessings through dreams. Sometimes a dream would foretell death itself. Sometimes it offered reassurance that the other world was near, ready to receive them. These visions were not random, but woven into the structure of existence, as if the cosmos itself spoke in symbols when the human mind was quiet. There is a gentle mystery in this, that the most profound insights came not through waking strength or reason, but through surrender to sleep. The dreamer became a traveler, wandering across landscapes where boundaries of time and space dissolved. Was this not a rehearsal of the afterlife, where the soul, freed from the body, moves unbound across vast and luminous realms? The stars, too, were seen as connected to these dream journeys. Their presence in the night sky mirrored the inner journeys of the sleeper. To gaze upward was to glimpse eternity. To close one's eyes was to feel it within. For the Celts, the heavens were not silent. They were alive with order, pattern, and rhythm. A dream that carried one among the stars was often thought to reveal the structure of fate, or the eternal resting place of the soul. Some traditions spoke of dreams as true journeys of the spirit. The body remained still, but the soul wandered. It crossed into the other world, spoke with ancestors, or glimpsed the halls of the dead. When morning came, the dreamer returned, carrying fragments of memory that were difficult to put into words. A lingering sense of awe, or dread, or peace was the only proof of where they had been. Why did the ancients trust dreams so deeply? Perhaps because dreams bypassed reason. They spoke in images, in symbols, in rhythms that echoed ritual and myth. The seer could interpret them, drawing meaning from the strange logic of the night. And because so many dreams revealed death or eternity, they reinforced the belief that the soul was destined for more than the visible world. Prophecies of eternity were not always comforting. A dream might warn of judgment, or of wandering unrest for the unburied, but others promised reunion, feasting, and song in the other world. The contrast was stark: fear of being lost, hope of being welcomed. Dreams carried both possibilities, leaving the living to ponder which vision would become their truth. And yet, beyond fear and hope, there was a quiet acceptance. Dreams taught that death was not a closed door, but a passage. If in sleep the soul could wander and return, then in death it might wander further, without return, into a vastness where ancestors and gods awaited. To sleep was to practice letting go. To dream was to practice eternity. Even now, when one wakes from a vivid dream of the dead or from a vision of light, there lingers a sense of having touched something beyond oneself. Was it only imagination? Or was it a glimpse, faint but real, of the same road that awaits in death? In the Celtic view, the question itself was part of the mystery. Dreams were not explained away but honored. They carried both the whisper of mortality and the promise of continuance. They reminded the living that the veil between this world and the next was thin, and that sometimes, in the stillness of sleep, it lifted just enough for the soul to see through. And so, one might ask, when your eyes close in the quiet of night and you drift into dreams, do you wander only within your mind? Or do you, for a fleeting moment, walk the very path your soul will take beyond life? Chapter 20. The Eternal Hunt and Moving Spirits. Across the dark skies of Celtic lands, people once believed there thundered a procession unlike any other. It was the Wild Hunt, a spectral company of riders, hounds, and spirits moving swiftly through the night. At its head rode Gwyn ap Nudd, a figure feared and revered, a lord of the dead and keeper of souls. To hear the echo of hooves in the silence of winter, or the distant baying of unseen hounds, was to sense this otherworldly host on its passage. The Wild Hunt was not unique to Celtic tradition. Versions of it are found across northern Europe. Tales of ghostly riders coursing across the heavens, sometimes bringing storms, sometimes carrying the souls of the dead. Yet in the Welsh tradition, Gwyn ap Nudd stands as its central guide. He was a psychopomp, one who gathered wandering spirits, leading them on their way. His hunt was not only a terror but a passage, a reminder that death was never still, but always moving. Gwyn himself is a complex figure. In medieval texts, he is described as ruler of Annwn, the otherworld, and as a warrior who restrains the chaos of demons lest they overwhelm the human world. His name means White Son of Nud, a title that suggests both brightness and purity, yet his role is shadowed with dread. To meet him was to be confronted with the nearness of death. Yet to acknowledge him was also to trust that the restless dead had a keeper, a master who ensured they did not stray too far. The wild hunt was said to sweep across the skies during the long, cold nights, especially in the dark months of winter. Travelers who heard its approach were warned to step aside, to throw themselves face down on the earth, lest they be swept away. To be caught in the hunt was to risk being taken to the other world, or worse, to wander forever as a lost soul. Still, some believed that offering respect, or even calling upon Gwyn, could bring protection or guidance from the spirits that followed him. The sound of the hunt was as important as the vision. The howls of hounds, sharp against the silence, were said to be those of the Annwn, spectral dogs with red ears and white bodies, creatures that belonged neither to this world nor the next. Their cries carried across valleys and hills, sometimes close, sometimes far away, shifting with the wind. For those who heard them, the sound was unforgettable, a reminder that the world of the living and the world of the dead were closer than one might think. Spectral processions of this kind often served as warnings. They told of souls who could not rest, of spirits caught between realms, but they also carried a guiding purpose. Just as Don led souls to his island in Irish tradition, so too did Gwyn's hunt gather the lost and wandering. The galloping riders were frightening, yes, but they were not mindless chaos. They were a host with direction, moving spirits toward their fate. In this sense, the hunt was both dread and order, fear and reassurance. Why did people imagine the dead as riding in great processions? Perhaps because death itself feels like a journey, never solitary, always shared. When one person dies, others follow. When one soul departs, countless more have already gone before. The wild hunt gave form to this procession, placing it in the night sky where its movements could be heard, sensed, and respected. There is a deeper layer too. The hunt symbolized the restlessness of nature itself. Storm winds racing across the land, leaves torn from branches, waves crashing on shores. These were the movements of restless spirits, the galloping of invisible riders. The Celts, attuned to the rhythms of the natural world, saw in these forces not mere weather, but the echo of souls in motion. Legends also tell of mortals drawn into the hunt. A warrior, hearing the hounds, might join the riders, riding among the dead for a night before returning to life. But others were not so fortunate. Some vanished, carried away forever. Such tales remind us of the delicate line between living and dead, a line that could be crossed suddenly, with no warning, if one failed to heed the signs. The hunt was not always seen as purely destructive. In some accounts, it was linked to fertility, the chase across the land stirring the soil, awakening its hidden life. Just as battles and feasts mark the turning of seasons, so too did the hunt, its motion mirroring the eternal cycles of decay and renewal. Death rode swiftly across the skies, yet its passing left behind the possibility of rebirth. To imagine Gwyn ap Nudd leading his host is to picture a figure at once terrible and compassionate. He gathered the dead not to punish them, but to guide them. He prevented the world from being overwhelmed by restless spirits. He kept order at the threshold, where chaos might otherwise seep into life. In this way, he resembled other psychopomp figures across world mythologies. Hermes leading souls in Greece, Anubis guarding the departed in Egypt. Each culture in its own way recognized the need for guardians at the gates of death, and so the wild hunt remains a story that blends fear with comfort. It warns of the dangers of ignoring the restless dead, but it also promises that no soul is entirely forgotten. Even in its wandering, even in its unrest, the spirit is swept into a greater procession, carried onward under the watchful eye of its leader. Imagine now the sound of hooves fading into distance. The barking of hounds once fierce grows faint. The night sky returns to silence, stars unbroken in their stillness. For those who listened, the hunt was both a warning and a gift, a fleeting reminder of the thinness of the veil. And when the silence deepens, one is left to wonder, are the riders truly gone, or do they continue their passage, forever circling, just beyond the edge of hearing? Chapter 21. Christianity and Transformation of Celtic Afterlife. When Christianity spread through the Celtic lands, it did not arrive to find a spiritual void. It entered a landscape already full of sacred groves, ancient rituals, and visions of an afterlife that was neither simple reward nor punishment, but a realm of shifting, otherworldly presence. The Celts held to their belief in realms beyond the living world, places of feasting, shadow, rest, or wandering. These were not strictly defined heavens or hells, but rather extensions of existence, where ancestors lingered and spirits traveled. With the rise of Christianity, the Celtic imagination of the afterlife began to transform. Christian teaching brought new structures, heaven as eternal reward, hell as endless punishment, and later, purgatory as a place of temporary cleansing. Yet instead of fully erasing older beliefs, these teachings often wove themselves into them. Celtic lands became spaces of continuity and change, where the old pathways of the dead were reimagined under a new light. The Celtic otherworld, once described as a realm of mist, music, and timeless feasts, slowly merged with visions of heaven. For early Celtic Christians, paradise did not necessarily mean golden streets or shining gates, but often remained a green land, a place of abundance, much like their ancestral myths had pictured. Instead of being discarded, the imagery of fertile meadows and eternal banquets was carried into Christian preaching, shaped now as the eternal kingdom of God. Hell, too, found its place, but it was filtered through Celtic imagination. Stories of torment became linked to landscapes that were already feared. Wild seas, deep caverns, storm-swept mountains. In Ireland, for example, traditions of terrifying islands or caves became associated with the entrance to hell. What had once been thresholds to mysterious realms were now painted as gateways to eternal punishment. Purgatory, a concept that became central in medieval Christianity, found a unique resonance in Celtic lands. Here, ancient traditions had long spoken of journeys after death, passages through trials, or stages of purification before reaching peace. Thus, when Christian monks described purgatory as a place of fire, cleansing, and waiting, Celtic listeners could recognize echoes of their own ancestral beliefs. Instead of seeming foreign, it felt like a familiar path given new interpretation. The visions of saints were powerful in shaping these blended ideas. Tales of holy men and women journeying in spirit to the otherworld, witnessing the rewards of the righteous and the punishments of the wicked, became widely told across Ireland, Wales, and beyond. St. Patrick, St. Bridget, St. Brendan, all were remembered not only for their deeds, but for how their lives and visions illuminated unseen realms. One of the most famous examples is St. Patrick's Purgatory, a site in Ireland where pilgrims believed they could physically experience the passage of souls. A cave on Station Island in Lough was said to be an entrance to purgatory itself. Pilgrims who entered endured long, harsh rituals, meant to symbolize the cleansing of the soul. For centuries, this place drew seekers from across Europe, blending local Celtic landscapes with the universal Christian drama of salvation. In these visions and rituals, we see the deep weaving together of two traditions. Christianity brought sharp moral lines and eternal destinies, while Celtic spirituality offered images of journey, transformation, and landscapes alive with presence. Together, they created a distinctive view of the afterlife, both rooted in Christian theology and colored by Celtic imagination. The saints' journeys often described the afterlife in terms that resonated with familiar terrain. Heaven was not distant, unreachable, or abstract. It was imagined as a land across the sea, or hidden within a sacred island. The otherworld's eternal feast became the heavenly banquet of Christ. The dark journeys through caverns or stormy seas became the trials of purgatory. Through these visions, Celtic Christianity translated eternal truths into local imagination. This blending did not erase older practices entirely. Folk traditions of honoring the dead, of leaving offerings or sensing spirits in the land continued alongside Christian rituals. The souls of the departed were prayed for in churches, yet many still believed they roamed the earth at certain times of year, especially around Samhain, when the boundary between living and dead was thought to thin. Christianity may have named this time All Saints and All Souls Days, But the older rhythms remained, reshaped but not silenced. Continuity is clear when we examine Celtic poetry and stories from the Christian era. While they praise Christ, heaven, and the saints, they also retain echoes of older motifs: the voyage across waters, the presence of guiding spirits, the transformation of the soul through trial. These were not contradictions, but rather a layering, where belief evolved without losing its roots. This transformation reflects a deeper truth. Belief is not static. It changes as new light falls upon it, as cultures meet, and as memory reshapes the sacred. In Celtic lands, Christianity did not wipe away the older ways entirely. Instead, it merged with them, reimagining old landscapes as stages of eternal destiny. The question that lingers is whether the spirit itself changes. If heaven is called paradise, or the other world, or the kingdom of God, does its essence differ? When people envisioned ancestors feasting in green fields, and later pictured saints rejoicing in the presence of God, perhaps both were gestures toward the same mystery, clothed in different images. In the silence that follows these stories, one might reflect, belief reshapes, yet the longing it seeks to answer endures. The Celts asked what lies beyond, and Christianity gave them new words for the same question. The images altered, but the search remained the same, and perhaps that is the enduring truth, that no matter the name or form, the spirit continues to reach beyond the visible, towards something eternal, something unending. Chapter 22. Folklore echoes in later centuries. Even as Christianity reshaped the beliefs of the Celtic world, the older voices of the land did not fall silent. They lingered in folklore, in whispered stories told beside fires, and in the murmurs of wind across lonely hills. Though theology taught of heaven, hell, and purgatory, the people of rural communities often continued to live with spirits that were closer, more immediate, and woven into the landscape itself. Fairies were among the most enduring echoes, not the delicate, winged figures of modern imagination, but beings both feared and respected. In Celtic folklore, they were thought to be remnants of older deities, or perhaps the souls of the dead, dwelling in hidden hills, caves, or beneath ancient mounds. Farmers left small offerings to them, hoping for protection of their livestock and crops. Children were warned not to wander too close to fairy rings, lest they be taken away into another world. In these tales, the ancient idea of an otherworld had not disappeared. It had simply changed its form, lingering as a presence that was both near and mysterious. The banshee carried another echo of afterlife belief. In Irish tradition, she was the wailing spirit, heard before the death of a family member. Her cry was a warning, a lament, and a reminder that death was never far. To hear her voice was terrifying, but it also confirmed a truth, that the boundary between life and death was thin, and that spirits were still guardians of that passage. Some families claimed a particular banshee followed them through generations, suggesting not a random haunting, but an enduring bond between lineage and spirit. Haunted hills, lakes, and ruins filled the landscape with reminders of older beliefs. Many sites were tied to stories of restless souls, or to tragic events that left their imprint on the land. A hill where a battle once raged was said to echo with ghostly armies. A quiet lake might be feared as the dwelling place of drowned spirits. Ruined monasteries, abandoned castles, and solitary standing stones were all treated with caution, as though the ground itself carried memories of those who had passed before. These places became natural shrines of memory, where the land seemed to hold the breath of the dead. In rural traditions, echoes of the Celtic afterlife lived on not only in tales, but in practices. At certain times of year, especially at Samhain, the threshold of winter, people lit candles or left food for wandering souls. Though officially framed as prayers for the departed in Christian ritual, the older meaning persisted. The dead were still moving among the living, and they needed recognition. In this way, communities carried forward the idea that the afterlife was not distant, but interwoven with the rhythms of the earth. Oral storytelling was the great preserver of these truths. Stories were passed from grandparents to children across centuries, often shifting in detail, but never losing their essence. In them, the Celtic vision of continuity survived. Life, death, and the other world were not fixed boundaries but flowing states, told again and again in tales of travelers meeting spirits, or of mortals who vanished into fairy mounds, only to return years later, unchanged. While the world outside had aged, These tales echoed the old belief that time itself was different in the other world, where eternity might pass in what seemed like a single night. What is striking is how folklore often retained the same mood as ancient religion. It was not always joyful or terrifying, but a mixture of both. The spirits of the dead could bring blessings or disasters. Fairies could offer gifts or steal children. A banshee's cry could be mournful, but also protective, reminding families to prepare for the inevitable. This duality reflects the Celtic vision of the afterlife itself. Neither purely good nor purely evil, but mysterious, layered, and alive. Even in later centuries, when literacy spread and formal theology dominated, these stories did not disappear. They became part of rural identity, a way of making sense of suffering, loss, and the unseen. For people who live close to the land, surrounded by weather, shadow, and silence, the idea that spirits move nearby was not superstition, it was lived reality. When a sudden wind rose, when an unexplained sound filled the night, when dreams carried a voice of the departed, the unseen was felt as deeply as the seen. Such folklore may be dismissed today as remnants of a vanished worldview, yet it holds a certain resilience. It reminds us that ancient truths do not vanish entirely, but adapt, whispering in new forms. The Christian afterlife may have promised eternity in heaven or cleansing in purgatory, but the folklore of fairies, banshees, and haunted hills kept alive the sense that the journey of the soul was not only cosmic but local, bound to the earth, to families, to hidden places known only by those who lived among them. There is a mystery in this survival. Why did people keep telling these stories century after century? Perhaps because they answered something that doctrines alone could not. The doctrines spoke of final judgment, but the stories spoke of presence. They suggested that the dead did not vanish, but lingered, watching, warning, or guiding. For a people who had always believed the other world was near, this continuity mattered. In the quiet of rural nights, when the only sound was the wind through trees or the distant call of an animal, these whispers seemed real. The land itself carried memory, and those who walked it felt they were never truly alone. In these echoes, one can hear the endurance of the Celtic afterlife, reshaped, retold, but still alive, still speaking through the folklore of later centuries. And so, the fairies still dance in hidden mounds, the banshee still cries at the window, and the haunted hills still murmur their stories. Perhaps these are not merely tales of the past, but reminders that every culture finds ways to keep the unseen near. For even when belief transforms, the whispers carried by the land endure, asking gently, do the dead ever truly leave us? Or do they remain, woven into the silence that surrounds our days? Chapter 23. Nature as a living afterlife. For the Celts and many other ancient peoples, nature was never just a backdrop to human life. It was alive, inhabited, and animated by presence. The rivers carried more than water, the winds bore more than weather, and the trees stood as more than wood. They were vessels of spirit, reflections of eternal cycles, and bridges between the mortal and the divine. To live among them was to live in constant dialogue with unseen forces, and in this way, nature itself became a living afterlife. The idea that souls dwell within the natural world is as old as Celtic tradition itself. A river was never only a river, it was a being, a presence with memory and voice. Many Celtic tribes honored river goddesses, believing that the waters carried the souls of the dead, flowing between this world and the other world. To step into a stream was to brush against eternity, and to watch the current was to see the silent procession of life and death moving endlessly onward. Even today, folklore lingers around sacred wells and springs, where offerings were once left for spirits of healing, prophecy, and rebirth. Trees carried a similar weight. They stood as guardians of continuity, rooted in the earth, yet reaching toward the heavens. In Celtic lore, each tree held a spirit, and groves were treated as sanctuaries where humans could meet the divine. The oak, the yew, the hazel, each carried its own associations with wisdom, endurance, or passage into the afterlife. The yew, in particular, often planted in graveyards, symbolized death and eternal renewal, its dark evergreen branches whispering of continuity beyond the grave. To rest beneath its shadow was to be close to the souls that had gone before. The winds, too, were believed to carry spirits. A sudden gust across a lonely hilltop was sometimes thought to be the passing of souls in motion, moving invisibly but perceptibly through the world. To feel the wind was to be touched by something more than air. It was as though the breath of the dead mingled with the breath of the living, a shared rhythm connecting both realms. Underlying all of this was a profound sense of animism, the belief that every element of nature carried spirit. Stones, rivers, trees, animals, even the soil underfoot were not inert matter, but participants in a great spiritual network. To walk through the natural world was to walk through a gallery of presences, each with its own voice, its own role in the ongoing cycle of life, death, and renewal. In such a worldview, the afterlife was never distant or abstract. It was here, surrounding and embracing every step. The cycles of the seasons reinforced this truth. Spring brought rebirth, summer abundance, autumn decline, and winter rest. Each shift in the year mirrored the passage of a soul, its arrival, its flourishing, its fading, and its quiet waiting for renewal. Death was not an end, but a season, part of a larger rhythm that promised return. Festivals such as Samhain and Beltane captured this rhythm, honoring thresholds where the living and the dead were thought to meet, just as the year itself moved between light and darkness. For ancient communities, watching these cycles unfold was a form of spiritual education. The falling leaves of autumn were reminders of mortality, yet their return in spring testified to endurance. The withering of fields did not mean an end, but a transformation. Through this lens, every change in the natural world became an echo of the afterlife, a whisper that souls, like leaves, would one day return. This way of seeing carried comfort. If a loved one died, their spirit was not imagined as lost to some distant heaven or hell, but as near, perhaps moving in the river that passed through the village, or whispering in the trees at the edge of the field. The grief of absence was softened by the sense of presence, by the conviction that the natural world held the departed and carried them into cycles that would never end. And perhaps this is why nature itself was revered as sacred. Shrines were not always built of stone, but often found in groves, springs, and hilltops. The people did not need to look far to find the divine. They looked to the earth, the water, the sky, and there they encountered the presence of ancestors and gods alike. It raises a quiet question. What if the afterlife is not only a place one travels to after death, but a presence that enfolds us even now? What if every river we cross, every wind that brushes our face, every season we endure, is already carrying us through glimpses of eternity? The Celts seem to live with this conviction. For them, the other world was not far away. It was intertwined with the natural, revealed in the shimmering surface of a lake, in the stillness of a forest, in the rising and setting of the sun. The eternal was here, not hidden, but shining through the ordinary, if only one had the eyes to see. And so the leaves continue to fall. They drift gently, silently, returning to the soil that nourished them. In time, they rise again as new growth, repeating the cycle endlessly. For those who saw the soul reflected in the rhythms of nature, this was more than beauty. It was assurance. The cycle of leaves was the cycle of souls, both moving through death and rebirth, never truly ending. To walk in such a world was to walk among the living and the dead at once, to feel their presence in the rustle of branches, in the flowing of streams, in the breath of wind across the hills. And perhaps even now, when you pause to listen closely, you too may wonder, are these voices of the earth only sounds of nature, or are they the whispers of those who came before, still speaking, still guiding, carried forever in the living afterlife that surrounds us? Chapter 24. Eternal Cycles, Time Without End. For the Celts, time was not an arrow drawn tightly on a string, released to fly forward in a single unbroken direction. Instead, it was a circle. It turned endlessly, repeating rhythms of birth and death, of growth and decay, of beginnings that were never truly separate from endings. This vision of circular time shaped their myths, their rituals, and their understanding of the afterlife itself. In the modern world, it is common to imagine time as linear. We move forward, step by step, toward a future distinct from the past. History is a progression, and our lives are seen as a brief journey from birth to death. Yet for the Celts, such a perspective would have felt incomplete, perhaps even foreign. Theirs was a worldview built on cycles, and through those cycles, eternity revealed itself. The seasons taught this lesson first. Each year the land withered under frost, only to bloom again in spring. The same fields that seemed lifeless in winter returned to abundance, proving that endings were not final, only transformations. Samhain, the festival of the dead, did not mourn the closing of a year, but marked the turning of the wheel into its next round. Time was not lost, it was renewed. This cyclical rhythm extended beyond the earth into the heavens. The stars themselves moved in patterns, rising and setting with seasons, tracing arcs across the night sky that returned year after year. To look upward was to witness repetition, not endless expansion. Just as the sun rose and fell each day, so too would the soul rise again after death. In this way, astronomy, agriculture, and spirituality were intertwined, all pointing toward an eternal cycle rather than a one-way path. The philosophy of rebirth grew naturally from this vision. If nature itself was forever renewing, why would human life be exempt? To the Celts, the soul could not simply vanish. Like a seed buried in the soil, it would return, emerging in a new form, joining the turning wheel once more. This belief softened the fear of death. Passing away was not an erasure, but a movement into another phase, a rejoining of the eternal rhythm. Mythology reinforced this conviction. Tales of heroes and gods often spoke of transformations rather than final endings. A warrior might fall in battle, but his spirit would be guided into another realm from which it could return. Deities themselves embodied cycles. Fertility gods dying with the harvest only to rise again in spring. Goddesses shifting between phases of youth, motherhood, and age, each role part of the unending circle. Even the otherworld, with its timeless feasts and immortal music, was not beyond cycles, but reflected them in perfect form, where the eternal and the repeating became one. To live within this worldview was to feel the continuity of all things. Life and death were not opposites, but companions. Each depended on the other, each fed into the other. The fall of leaves nourished the soil. The decay of bodies enriched the earth. The silence of winter prepared the ground for renewal. What ended did not truly end. It transformed and began again. This perspective raises quiet questions about how one lives. If time is circular, then each act echoes, not once, but continually. Choices ripple outward, not only for today, but for all cycles yet to come. Perhaps this is why ritual held such importance. Ceremonies did not simply mark moments in time. They renewed bonds, refreshed patterns, and kept the circle intact. Without them, the rhythm might falter, and balance might be lost. It also reframes the way death was approached. In a linear view, death marks a firm boundary, a conclusion that cannot be undone. In a circular view, death is only a doorway. The spirit does not depart forever but returns, just as the sun slips below the horizon only to rise again. This understanding infused funerary practices, where the body was honored not as a vessel broken, but as one returning to the cycle of earth, wind, and sky. In some ways, this circular time resonates with philosophies found far beyond the Celtic world. Hinduism, Buddhism, and other traditions also speak of samsara, the endless turning of rebirths. Even in the Stoic reflections of the Mediterranean, there are whispers of eternal recurrence. It is as if human beings across cultures, watching the same seasons and the same stars, recognize that life cannot be a straight line. It turns, it repeats, it endures. For the Celts, this endurance brought comfort. No soul was ever lost, no season ever wasted. Each return was part of a greater whole. To imagine eternity was not to imagine an endless forward stretch, but an infinite turning, always moving, always beginning anew. And yet, this idea holds a quiet tension. If the cycle repeats forever, does anything ever truly change? Is each life a return of what has been before? Or is each cycle a chance for growth, for new expression within the eternal wheel? The Celts may not have offered one fixed answer. Instead, they lived in the mystery, honoring both the sameness and the renewal that cycles carried. As time turned, so too did memory. Ancestors were not left behind but present, woven into the cycles of land and season. To light a fire at Samhain was to call them close, not as distant figures of the past, but as companions still within the eternal turning. The circle of time allowed the living and the dead to share space, their paths overlapping in ways both visible and unseen. Perhaps this is why the imagery of wheels, spirals, and knots appears so often in Celtic art. These were not only decorations, but reflections of philosophy. A spiral carved into stone was a symbol of eternal motion, of journeys that twist and return, of lives that never truly end. Even now, to look upon such symbols is to feel their meditative pull. guiding the mind toward stillness within motion, toward eternity within repetition. In this vision of circular time, stillness itself takes on a different meaning. Stillness is not absence of movement, but harmony within the cycle. Just as a wheel can turn endlessly yet remain balanced, so too could the soul find peace within eternal recurrence. To meditate on this was to step into a rhythm larger than oneself, to rest in the knowledge that endings are beginnings, and beginnings are endings, without separation. The circle turns, leaves fall, only to rise again, sunset only to return, souls depart only to re-emerge. Time does not break, does not run out, but continues without end. And so, as one reflects on this vision, a gentle thought lingers. If all things are part of the eternal cycle, then perhaps nothing is ever truly lost. Perhaps each moment, each life, each soul remains, turning quietly, endlessly, within the great circle of time. Chapter 25. Closing reflections in the Celtic night. As the Celtic night deepens, the world grows quiet. Mists drift across fields and rivers, softening the edges of earth and sky. In this hush, one feels the presence of more than the visible. The air itself seems layered, holding memory, spirit, and eternity close. This is not a silence of absence, but of fullness, an atmosphere where ancestors walk unseen, where the cycles of life and death echo like steady footsteps, and where time folds in upon itself, endless and unbroken. The Celts carried with them a vision of reality that never separated the living from the dead, the present from the past, or the sacred from the ordinary. Everything touched, overlapped, and returned. To stand in the cool night air was not simply to witness the close of a day, but to feel the turning of the great wheel, the eternal rhythm that bound all beings together. Mists themselves held meaning. They were thresholds, veils between realms, neither solid nor void. A traveller moving through mist was never entirely in one world. The Celts often placed their myths within such landscapes, where the other world could be entered not through grand gates, but through a simple fog rising from the earth. The night mist was a reminder that eternity was always near. Not a distant concept, but a quiet presence drifting across the land. Ancestors, too, were never far away. At festivals such as Samhain, the veil was believed to thin, allowing the departed to draw close. Fires were lit, not only to ward off darkness, but to welcome those who had walked before. These gatherings affirmed the cycle of life and death, showing that bonds were not broken by time. To eat, to sing, to remember together was to weave the living into the company of the dead. The night, therefore, was never empty. It was crowded with memory, with guidance, with unseen companionship. In this worldview, eternity was not a far-off horizon. It was woven into the present, as close as breath, as steady as the heartbeat. Time itself was not a straight path leading away from life, but a circle folding back upon itself. Within this circle, every soul remained, renewed and reborn, carried forward yet never lost. This vision transformed the way death was understood. To pass into the night was not to vanish, but to join a greater rhythm. And so, when the Celts looked into the darkness, they did not see finality. They saw continuity. The cycles of nature mirrored this truth. The falling leaf, the rising sun, the return of spring. Each ending contained its own beginning. Each silence carried the seed of sound. Even in the longest night, dawn waited, hidden but certain. Perhaps this is why Celtic stories often close not with firm conclusions, but with lingering images. A hero passes into mist. A goddess transforms, shifting her form but never ceasing. A feast continues in the other world, beyond reach yet eternal. Such endings are less about closure than about continuation, reflecting a belief that the story, like time itself, never truly ends. For the listener, this carries a quiet comfort. To reflect on eternity in Celtic thought is not to be overwhelmed by endlessness, but to rest in the knowledge that life is part of something steady, rhythmic, and secure. Just as the stars return to their places in the sky, so too do souls return to the cycle of existence. Nothing is wasted, nothing is abandoned. In the stillness of the Celtic night, this philosophy becomes almost tangible. The mind slows, the heart softens. One senses that to rest is to join the rhythm of the earth itself, to become part of the same eternal cycle that governs leaf and river, ancestor and star. There is a serenity in knowing that one is never alone in this turning. The ancestors remain close. The cycles carry on without faltering. The mists conceal, but they also reveal. And within this endless rhythm lies a promise that what departs will return, that what fades will be renewed, that what rests will rise again. As the night gathers fully, the Celtic vision closes not with fear, but with calm assurance. Eternity is not distant. It surrounds you. It moves in the whisper of wind through branches, in the unseen steps of those who came before, in the patient turning of time itself. The wheel turns, unbroken. The circle holds all things. In this knowledge, one may rest. One may let the weight of day dissolve into timeless stillness, carried by the same rhythm that has moved through countless generations. And perhaps, in this quiet, a gentle thought emerges. If eternity is as close as the mist, as steady as the cycle of seasons, then rest itself becomes a sacred act, a return to the circle, a joining with the eternal night,